Hello, this is a guy who likes fanfiction and is too lazy to read, so here is Protector of the Fairies in audio form. Check the description for the links to the author. Protector of the Fairies. The Way to Death. Era. It was a town unlike any he had been to. While the others had a calmer and casual charm, this town was instead more of a majestic feel. Each building had been built to stand out and to shine, and they weren't even the main attraction. In the center of the town was a rocky mountain, stretching high above the rest of the city. Resting on the top of that mountain stood a solitary building. It was the home of the highest power in Fiori, the Magic Council. It was exhausting work climbing up to it. He obviously wasn't needed urgently enough to spare him from the torturous stairs, so he had been left to walk up them. Every single one of them. What possessed them to build up so high? He supposed it was probably in case of attack, as few rogue mages would be able to launch attacks up at them from the ground at that distance, and few mages had the ability to fly in the first place. It also seemed to have a secondary purpose. He had noticed that people in the city looked up at the building in awe and respect. The council was essentially using the height to make them look superior, almost out of reach of the residents of Fiori. It made it seem like they were important. They were, but they didn't have to show off about it. The headquarters for the Magic Council was made from pure white stone, with areas of light blue bricks in places. It was very elegant in its design, resembling a church in some ways because of its central tower and its arched covers. There were some more towers at the sides of the building, rectangular in shape. They connected to the main building, and balconies could be seen above the entrance to the building itself. Just outside were lush gardens, casting shadows from the few hedges around the area. A guard opened the door for him as he approached, allowing him entrance to the establishment. The council must have realized that he was coming and had alerted the guards to prepare for his arrival. Smart. It meant he wouldn't have to wait long if they were in a meeting or something. They were showing him a lot of courtesy here. They must have really wanted him to take the request and had made a show of how important they saw him being. The inside was just as majestic as the outside, though there were a lot of corridors in his opinion. It took a good 5 minutes of searching, and the occasional guard's help, to find where he was aimed for. The entrance to the Magic Council's meeting room was gigantic. In the center of the door was the Ankh symbol the council used to identify themselves. As if on command, the door slowly swung open, a loud creak filling the air. Ichigo slowly entered the room, keeping his eye out for any danger. You could never be too careful. It was just paranoia talking, as no danger presented itself. Instead, he found himself in a massive room, 10 seats present behind a talk barrier where the council was present. It seemed to also double as desks for them. Just in front of them was a smaller table that contained another 10 seats. Ichigo quickly grabbed one, ignoring the gasps from some of the council. It was just a chair, and they didn't expect him to stand while they sat, did they? One of the council members was examining him closely. The man was definitely very old, but unlike Makarov, he hadn't shrunk. He had a long gray beard and mustache with his hair combed back behind his head. His ears were pointed and he only seemed to have his right eye opened. On the top of his head was a strange bat-like creature. You are Ichigo, correct? The council member said, confirmed his identity. No surname known. Mage of Fairy Tale. Yes. A simple replied. They already knew all this anyway, and they knew his answer. Good. I assume you have accepted our REQ-. What's the deal with this item you want me to retrieve anyway? How dare you? Ichigo looked over towards a cat-like old man, surprised at his appearance. Such blatant disrespect. Now Michello. A man with a 3-spiked black hat stopped the council member's rant. There is no need to get mad at Ichigo here. You know how youngsters are. Don't defend him, Yahima. A dark-haired man wearing shades joined the argument, the hood from his cloak over his head. With his small eyebrows and long black sideburns, it made the man look angry and serious without any effort from the man himself. It must have been infuriating outside these meetings. Enough. The council member in the center quieted the three without any argument. Michello, Yahima, Leiji. Please settle your problems later. Ichigo eyed the man who had spoken. He looked younger than he probably was, but he still seemed very old. His long white hair stretched behind him and he could spot the hilt of a sword by his side. And even when he had spoken harshly to the other members, he still looked kind, only frowning slightly as he spoke to them. His presence was tremendous. Even the other council members were paying respect to him, despite his appearance. It was clear who he was from how they listened to him. He was the chairman of the Magic Council. Now then. The chairman offered a serene smile towards Ichigo. I trust you are curious about the item that was stolen. Chairm dash. The chairman silenced the council member with one look. It was the same one who had spoken first to Ichigo when he had arrived. Come now, Org. I don't believe our young friend here is stupid by any means. We did say that we wanted the item returned to Era. I trust that you remember that. The council member, now known to be Org, grumbled quietly but didn't say anything else. Great then. Well now Ichigo. I can call you that, can't I? I don't exactly have a surname to go by. Ichigo could tell the man was subtly fishing for information. Just Ichigo. And should I just call you chairman? Michello looked outraged and as if he wanted to protest about his attitude again. The chairman laughed. Juoshiro. Juoshiro Yukatake. Ichigo gave a brief nod at the man in respect. He hadn't entirely expected the man to actually give him his name. Then again, the chairman seemed to have this friendly aura about him. He almost seemed like he was harmless. Almost. Juoshiro reached under his desk and pulled out a slip of paper. He held out his hand and the paper was surrounded by a golden light as it was lowered slowly down to Ichigo. Before it reached him though, it stopped as Juoshiro gave him a scrutinizing look. Before you see this, we need to know for certain that you are willing to go along with this. Now will be your last chance to back else. Doing so after reading this will result in disastrous consequences. He didn't know how Juoshiro managed to seem so kind yet could instill so much terror in his words. Ichigo didn't think for a moment that the chairman was joking. No one joked about something like this, and he didn't want to know what would happen if he accepted and then backed out. This didn't chance his answer though. He stared back at the man who smiled at his courage. It was as if he had been tested and had been found successful. The paper finished its descent towards Ichigo who grabbed it before scanning the contents. It didn't explain too much but it said that it was a ring that allowed the user to drain the life from around the wielder and use it to power the ring's death attacks. It was horrible to read about it. And Zeref had created such a tool? Why? Wasn't he meant to have a mastery over death magic? Was this meant to amplify them or did it serve another purpose? It is a horrible thing, isn't it? Ichigo looked back up to Juoshiro. Yeah. But how was something like this stolen? Shouldn't it be under maximum protection? We don't know, said Yahima. Something like this can only be accessed by at least 5 members of the council together or by the chairman himself. Yahima is correct. Juoshiro coughed suddenly into his hand and the council turned to him in worry. I'm okay, he managed to say. As I said, Yahima is correct. And since none of us took it, it means that someone in Poison Viper stole it. Org spoke up then, taking over for the chairman to recover. We believe that Poison Viper possess a mage capable of either teleporting past the ring's defenses or an ability to disguise himself as one of us and disable the security. Thank you, Org, said Juoshiro. That brings us to the hard part of your mission. Loath are we to condone such an action, it is not enough for us to just retrieve the ring. If the mage who stole it managed to get the ring in the first place, they could do so again. The safety and security of our prisons are also at risk. We cannot know for certain if it would be enough to hold such an individual, and we cannot risk their escape. Any number of their mages could be capable of it. 1, 20, the entire guild, there is too much risk involved. As much as I hate to do this, the council cannot allow this guild to become free and we cannot allow the other dark guilds to get the same idea. We need to send them a message, for the sake of peace in the magical world. Ichigo was almost afraid to ask. What do you want me to do? Juoshiro gave him a sad smile. You are a Shinigami. Normally, we do not condone killing but here, it is a necessary evil. Since long ago, people have always been lenient with Shinigami because of how useful they are. Once again, we must invoke this practice. You want me to kill them all? Yes. I see. Ichigo clenched his fists in anger. Why couldn't they have told him this beforehand? It wouldn't have been too much to give away if they had done so. He couldn't back out though. Not now. Juoshiro knew that and had offered him that chance, but he had denied it. The advantages had outweighed any dangers. Could he really do as they asked? Could he kill? And if he refused, what would happen? He knew though that he didn't want to find out what the consequences would be. He was trapped, and the only way to get out was to eliminate the Dark Guild, once and for all. Where do I go? Juoshiro eyed him carefully before he sent down another sheet of paper. Here is the latest report of their hideout. We have one of our trainees watching them, a few years older than you I believe. He should be returning here in about an hour or two, maybe longer, and will be able to transport you to their current hideout. I warn you though. Once he returns, you will be leaving shortly afterwards. I will be ready. Good. Juoshiro clapped his hands, a sign that the session was over. There are rooms nearby you can wait in. It doesn't matter too much which one you pick. Your magical power makes it easy to work out where you are. Ichigo scowled but got the message. He left silently, finding a room and resting down onto one of the few chairs available. He had time, and what he was about to do sounded like it was going to be taking on his very soul. For now, he would rest. Maybe some sleep would do him good. Just for a little while. Protector of the Fairies. Wake up. That was what Ichigo found himself waking up to. He had to rub his eyes a few times before they managed to identify the man trying to wake him. Org. Who said you could address me so casually? Ichigo shrugged it off. He was never good at addressing people with their titles and would most likely end up continuing to do so even in the king's presence of someone else of equal status. The only one he actually called by his title was the Master, and that was more because he actually belonged to Fairy Tail. He didn't owe any other organizations the same level of respect. Why'd you wake me up? Am I heading off? Soon, Org said as he pulled himself down onto one of the chairs nearby. I went to wake up when we heard of our man's arrival. After he has finished reporting to the chairman, he will meet you here to take you to Poison Viper. I see. Ichigo stared at the man curiously. You could have sent anyone to wake me up. Instead they sent you, a distinguished member of the Magic Council. Perceptive aren't you, brat? He seemed to have gained some sort of approval from the old man. I'm still assessing you. Assessing? Analyzing your character, identifying strengths and weaknesses, and deciding whether you will be useful for future operations. And you think I'll be useful? Of course. The man gestured towards the sword on Ichigo's back. Look at that. It's a sign that you are a Shinigami. It's exactly why you're useful. I'm still not sure why that makes me useful. Org sighed. The chairman didn't make it completely clear to you. It's that status of yours that is important. The council member pointed to himself. I'm just a normal mage. So are many people in the world. If someone killed another person, they get punished dependent on the situation. If we allowed someone to kill another though, why do they escape justice? Why is there one rule for the council and another for the rest of the world? These questions. They could tear the council apart. We must set an example, and it is rare that we need to order the death of others, and even then it is debated heavily and done as a last resort. Org turned his hand till he was pointing at Ichigo. The chairman said that there has been leniency for Shinigami before. That is why we wanted someone like you. You not only have the required strength for this mission, but you also have the Shinigami label. Ichigo shook his head. He still didn't get it. Why do Shinigami get leniency though? Because Shinigami got their name from their past. Their past. Org looked at the boy like he had grown a second head. Do you not even know the past of your magic? Wielders of it in the past were known for their brutality, taking the lives of people without remorse, just like true Shinigami. One day though, one of them decided to end it and helped create the foundations of the Magic Council. Do you want to know what he asked in exchange? Asked Org. Nothing. The man said nothing, just leaving and never being found again. Both the old reputation of the Shinigami and their old services with the council made us decide to allow leniency for those who use Shinigami magic, as long as they do not abuse the power. One way we made sure of this was to only allow this action on missions where there was no other choice, like the one you are taking today. I understand. Ichigo couldn't swear that he completely did, but he understood enough. The council wanted a way to act without looking like hypocrites, and as a Shinigami, he could act for them. Still though, continued Org, we didn't choose you for no reason either. We got a message from an old rune knight of ours. Kisuke Urahara. Ichigo froze, looking at the man for any signs that he was lying. There was none. But what was the man talking about? Kisuke had been a fairy tale mage, hadn't he? I can see from your face that you are familiar with the man. Ichigo could only nod. I see. That's good then. The council trusts him a great deal for his past services, so his recommendation carried a lot of worth for you. I saw another reason. And that is fairy tale. Org looked angry to even say the guild's name. Currently, fairy tale is an upstart, causing problems as they become more and more destructive. We have no control over that strength, and that worries us all a great deal. They could go to war and we would have a powerful force to deal with. I partially don't like them because we are tolerating something we won't get anything back on. They will cause problem after problem and we have to put up with their attitude. But I don't like shutting down guilds. The members will scatter before joining new guilds, possibly spreading the problem. Org once again pointed to Ichigo. You are a fairy tale mage alongside being a Shinigami. With you taking missions from us, it allows us to get something back from tolerating fairy tale. An exchange. And if I said I don't want to take any more missions? Org gave him a grim look. Then we have no reason to tolerate fairy tale. Ichigo contemplated what the man had said. It all made sense. The council couldn't afford to be nice in the face of harsh problems, and as long as he gave them a reason for them to keep fairy tale around, they would leave the guild alone. First though, he had to prove himself on this one mission. And to do so required him to kill the entire Dark Guild. Org patted him on the shoulder as he hoisted himself to his feet. The trainee should be here soon to take you there. His name is Doran Bolt. Org walked to the door and was about to leave when he decided to give Ichigo a few last words of advice. Good luck. I rather hope you succeed. Ichigo watched the man leave before the room was cast into silence. He was left with nothing but his thoughts, and they all were focused on the task ahead. He would have to embrace the trainings Kisuke taught him more than ever. He couldn't afford to waste magic shielding his sword's blows. He had to fight with the intent to kill his opponent, just like he had to do when he fought Kisuke. He had to treat everyone there as a threat and remove them. He didn't have to wait long before a boy of about 15 entered the room. The boy had short black hair, almost shaved off completely, with 3 scars decorating the left side of his face. On the boy's left ear was a small earring with an elongated pendant hanging from it. Ah, said the boy slightly nervously. Ichigo. Yeah. Ah. Good. The boy shuffled slightly on the spot before realizing he hadn't introduced himself. I'm Doran Bolt. I'll be taking you to your destination. Ichigo tilted his head curiously at the trainee. How are we getting to Poison Viper? A magical vehicle of some kind. Doran Bolt shook his head. Sorry. That takes a bit too long. Poison Viper was getting ready to move out soon. They could be leaving as we speak. We can't travel normally or we'll lose them. Then how are we getting there? Ichigo stared out at the hand that was suddenly extended in front of him. You want me to take your hand? My magic allows me to teleport to a destination of my choice. I already marked out where we need to arrive to, so we should get there accurately, despite the distance. Instantaneously. Doran Bolt nodded. Cool. Yes, said Doran Bolt, happy for the praise. My mentor said I'm extremely advanced for my age. Ichigo stretched out his hand and grabbed hold of Doran Bolt's own. You better not miss. Doran Bolt gave him an uneasy smile before the surroundings changed. The stone and marble changed to soil and trees as the world spun, and they found themselves at the edge of a forest, a small pattern of runes sketched into the ground. Ichigo stared at them, wondering what the runes meant. Anchor points. Ichigo glanced over at the trainee. I'm not skilled enough yet to use it in combat as I still need somewhere to lock onto. I'm getting better though. That pattern of runes was a lot bigger when I started. Ichigo nodded before he let his gaze wander around the area. There, on the edge of his senses. What was it? It wasn't evil so much, rather it radiated death in a way he didn't know he could recognize, and it was strong too. He didn't bother looked at the forest. His eyes had already locked onto the ring's location. Just a bit further away in the distance, he could see the signs of an abandoned building, perhaps a research base or something similar. Doran Bold had chosen a good point to teleport them to. While they had a decent view of the guild's current base of operations, it didn't work both ways. The Dark Guild would have only found Doran Bold when they decided to scout outwards, and it didn't look like they had done even that. They seemed to have found a base and gotten arrogant that they were safe. Anyone would get an ego when they managed to bypass the Magic Council's security, so he could understand their arrogance, but they should have at least kept a lookout. From Doran Bold's position, he must have been able to keep an eye on the base to make sure they stayed there without any resistance from the Dark Guild itself. Ichigo gave Doran Bold a half wave as he walked towards the base. The trainee didn't look like a fighter, so he seemed to be staying far away. Better that way. He wouldn't let anyone else taint their hands with this job if he could help it. It made him glad he hadn't brought Laxus along, though he would have probably been sent home if he had come anyway. Had Poison Viper become aware of him yet? He knew he gave off a powerful presence to people because of his magical power. Laxus said he could find him easily because of it since he was so familiar with it, but it was also because it was so large. And if a large source of magical energy suddenly appeared near their base, he knew the Dark Guild would be on guard. As long as they didn't escape, it was okay. And he couldn't risk it happening. Kisuk had taught him something in case of a situation like this long ago. Not all Bakuda's spells were just to restrain the enemy, and he would use one right now to ensure they couldn't escape. He would seal them inside a barrier with him. He held out his hand behind him and an orange light stretched outwards towards four corners. The lights then extended out into transparent orange walls. The light then kept stretching out till the entire area had been sealed within a cube. Ichigo pressed a hand to the barrier, happy with his handiwork. The spell worked just as intended. It wouldn't stop anything big and was rather flimsy, but it served its purpose. It was to ensure no one got out, and no matter what the mage had done to bypass the council's security, it wouldn't work here. It wasn't arrogance speaking. The barriers of Shinigami weren't meant to be slipped past. They were strong, and the only way out was to break the barrier or wait for it to wear off. One good hit on this barrier would break it if the mage was competent, but if it broke, he would know someone was trying to escape. It would serve as a warning system too. Now all he had to do was get them out of their little bunker. He had no doubt that the place would be littered with traps of all kinds, and it would be perfect for ambushes. He needed to bring them out. He closed his eyes in thought, making sure to also count the number of people he could sense. 50. Not many of them were particularly strong except for the select few, so the majority was cannon fodder material for the guild. He would need to shorten their numbers quickly. A strong Kita would draw them out. Blast open their hideout and charge in before they can stop him. Shakaha would be a good choice normally, but he wanted the blast to continue much further than Shakaha did, and Sukatsui was 2 levels higher than it for a reason. Yeah, Lord. Mask of flesh and bone, flutter of wings, yeah, who bears the name of man. Truth and temperance, upon this sinless wall of dreams unleash but slightly the wrath of your claws. Unlike before, this time he wouldn't fire it as a wave. That was good for crowd control, but he needed to blast his way in. He would pour as much magic as he could into the spell and then fire it as a direct blast at the target. He would have a few moments in the confusion to find the leader. The few time he and Laxus had faced dark guilds, they had noticed that their leaders were always very arrogant. It also made them overconfident sometimes, and if he challenged the leader there and there, he would accept the challenge. Plus, if he had the ring on him instead of stored away, he would want to have someone to test the ring's power on. Who better than the guy who just knocked down you hideout's wall? Haida number 33, Sukatsui. The blast tore straight through the wall, and he could hear some of the cries of pain from the ones unlucky enough to be standing in the way. He ignored them though as he charged into the guild, weaving past the dark mages before they even realized he was there. He drew his sword and was already striking at the leader when the leader spun around, dark energy swirling around his right fist. He struck out straight at Ichigo, the orange-haired Shinigami barely having time to dodge and get some distance between them. The dark mage stared at him in shock. He must have acted on instincts that would have been developed from years of experience. The dark energy wasn't his though. As the energy dissipated, a black ring could be seen on the leader's finger. A sinister smile filled the man's face as he took in Ichigo. Well boys. Looks like someone decided to pay us a visit. The men around him recovered from the previous distraction before breaking into laughter, all at Ichigo's expense. They weren't making any movements to flee yet. That was good. They were instead blocking off his escape, trying to box him in. I sensed you earlier when you arrived but I lost track of you in that distraction. You have skills kid but it takes a lot more than that to kill a viper. Is that the ring you stole? The man looked surprised at his question before a switch seemed to be flicked in the man's mind. Ah. I get it now. That sword of yours isn't an ordinary one is it? You a Shinigami? The Magic Council send you? Ichigo nodded, answering all those questions. So that's it is it? The man held out his hands out wide. So the council seeks to subjugate us once more? And what if we refuse? Ichigo raised his sword, aiming it squarely at the man. Death? They thought a kid would be enough? You may have a lot of magical power but I have something to equal that power. The leader raised his arm as the ring glowed brightly, a magic seal appearing over the ring. Around the man, men started falling, clutching their hearts. Ichigo stared at the man in shock. They were your allies. They were my subordinates. The man laughed at Ichigo's furious expression. We're a dark guild. Few of us have any loyalty to one another in Poison Viper. This is a den of snakes, all seeking their own goals. We just happen to have the same destination in mind currently. Ichigo charged the man, his sword swinging down at the man's head. He wasn't even thinking anymore. He was angry, and he was going to make this man pay. The man laughed at Ichigo's attempts before a wall of darkness appeared in front of the two. Ichigo paused mid-charge before he jumped, magic amplifying his legs. He cleared the wall in one moment and stabbed downwards. The leader of the guild rolled to the side, bringing the ring back before he launched another blast of darkness straight at Ichigo. He couldn't move in midair and he couldn't counter with a Kidyu in this short of time. Instead, he channeled as much magic into his sword as he could and swung. He had been attempting to blast the attack away with the force of his swing. Instead, he launched a wave of blue energy at the mage, shaped in the form of a crescent moon. The eyes of the Dark Guild's leader bulged as he took in the attack. It cut straight through his own attack and kept on going. He barely dodged himself before the attack sailed past his head. Ichigo was still staring in shock. He hadn't even used an attack like that before. The closest he had ever gotten was to disperse attacks with enhanced swings of his sword, but never something like this. The attack had continued on much further than he had thought and had even managed to cut into the stone floor. The leader stared at Ichigo in worry, his hands grasping at the ring in worry. His eyes would keep jumping between the new small gorge in the ground and at Ichigo himself. Say kid, he said nervously. What says you join us? We could use someone of your talent. Ichigo ignored him, slashing at the man with his sword. He didn't expect the attack to simply send the man flying backwards. What happened? He didn't even inflict a wound. A cry of laughter erupted from the leader as he pulled himself up, the ring glowing brightly on his finger. We'll look at that. I'm perfectly fine. Ichigo watched the man reach into his pocket before he pulled out a knife. It glowed a bright green as the blade extended outwards till it resembled a proper sword. The Dark Guild leader gave the sword a few test swings to make sure it was working fine before the ring activated again, stealing the life of two more of the guild. The energy then flowed down the blade till it was covered in darkness. Do you know what your mistake was? Mistake? What did he do wrong? You showed mercy. The man shot forward, bringing the sword down on Ichigo's with a surprising amount of force. The darkness on the blade tried to stretch across his own blade before he managed to pull away in time. He wasn't sure what would happen if that energy touched him, but the ring was supposed to give the user the ability to use death magic. One hit and who knows how much damage that darkness would do to him. It could even kill him instantly. I wonder if you have noticed that you are still shielding your blows. He was. A subtle glance confirmed it. He had gone to try and take the man down, and because of such, he had subconsciously dulled the edge of his blade. He hadn't tried to kill the man, and his magic had responded in kind. You're a naive kid. You aren't a killer. But I am. The man charged again, swinging the blade like a madman. He wasn't acting cautiously anymore, and Ichigo knew why. He could obviously take the power of a dulled strike and knew that Ichigo wasn't trying to kill him yet. Worse, as long as the blade made connection, he would do a lot of damage instantly. Where did your spirit go? Come on. Give me a challenge. If he didn't manage to kill the man soon, he would die. There was no other way out. But first, he had to break away. The leader, however, had another surprise planned. As he attacked with one sword, another knife slid out of his sleeve and hit Ichigo in the side. He almost lost focus as the knife connected, the leader's sword coming too close for comfort. His left leg spun out and kicked the man, using the temporary distraction to pull back. He glanced at his side. The wound wasn't serious. No veins had been cut and it looked to only be a flesh wound. It still hurt though. Looks like the little Shinigami is losing. What should I do, fellas? Maybe he's nervous. Should I let him fight someone more recognizable? The guild broke out into cheers at his words. Recognizable. The leader held up the small knife. See your blood here? That's how I do it. Just a little blood and I can transform into either yourself or anyone you have ever met. Anything works as long as it has your DNA. I just need to see those memories of who you cherish, and pick one to become. That ability. It was so much like the hollow that killed his mother. Did the hollow have this magic before and turned into a hollow? Shall I show you? The leader didn't wait for an answer. He lifted the knife to his mouth and licked off the blood, every feature on his body changing. When it ended, Ichigo came face to face with a familiar face. Really, who else would have a hat like that? The leader finished his transformation into Kisuke before he looked at himself in surprise. That's odd. Wasn't going for this guy. Doesn't matter much though. Let's see you fight your own mentor. The fake Kisuke charged again at Ichigo, swinging his sword in a familiar Kisuke manner. He doubted he could use Kisuke's magic, but he could still fight like Kisuke. The feints were there along with the sudden counters. The leader had improved dramatically by becoming Kisuke, but he had gained his own problems, it seemed. Every so often, he would prepare the motions that would fire a Kidya before he had to stop himself, solidifying his theory that magic wasn't carried over. It wasn't working out well for the leader as it kept giving him plenty of opportunities to launch a few surprise strikes of his own. The ring glowed brightly suddenly as darkness suddenly shot out in a massive wave. Ichigo took his sword and raised it up high, remembering the feeling of the strike he had used before. It was almost like someone was whispering the secrets to it in his ear. Then he swung. The energy flowed out and blasted into the opposing dark energy, the two exploding as they cancelled each other as they collided. Ichigo shot through where the two energies collided and swung his sword. Thin air. The leader wasn't there. Where did he go? Got you. Ichigo froze, his eyes sliding towards the voice. The leader had jumped and was now falling straight at him, his sword ready to slice him in half. The leader should have never have transformed. He gained Kisuke's fighting style and he had become much stronger, but if he had paid more attention, he would have noticed that the attacks he had been inflicted had left cuts. They hadn't been dulled. So as the sword began its descent down in an arc, Ichigo acted. Familiar instincts sounded in his head and he did what he would have done if he had been fighting Kisuke. He went to kill. He barely recognized the sword passing straight into the leader's chest. Only when the clang of the opponent's sword hitting the ground finally brought him back to reality. The transformation wore off and the leader returned to his original appearance, a blade pierced through his chest. Well, look at that, he muttered quietly. I got the one guy you could actually kill. The reality of the situation suddenly hit Ichigo as he watched the life disappear from the man's eyes. He killed the man. He had known that was what he needed to do and had prepared to do so, but actually doing so. He killed him. Don't let him get away. Revenge will be ours. Ichigo wasn't listening to the voices, even as he sensed all of them getting closer to him. He was too lost in his own thoughts. One of the dark mages swung a weapon at Ichigo before he felt pain erupting through his body. All he saw as he died was the lifeless eyes of Ichigo above him, still lost to his surrounds. Ichigo didn't bother fighting his body's instincts now. He let the rest of the guild charge him, and then he let his instincts take over. Protector of the fairies. Bloody instincts. Doran Bolt was scared. No, more than that. He was absolutely terrified. He had known what this mission would be like. He had to transport the Shinigami, Ichigo, to the current headquarters of Poison Viper. Then, he would be left to observe and report back to the council on how Ichigo acted on the mission. He was essentially Ichigo's examiner. That was what he signed up for. He wasn't too worried about seeing some death. He was an infiltration specialist, and while he was still a trainee, he had experienced a few cases of death. It was the less glamorous aspect of the job, but it had to be done sometimes. What he had experienced had been quick and simple though. Silent killing, so that he had remained undiscovered until he escaped. That meant that deaths were quick and effortless, but also as painless as possible. This wasn't what he expected to see. Ichigo was younger than him. He had expected to see some rough killing, but in the end, he had still been holding on to the memories of his own kills. This wasn't killing the Dark Guild though. This was a one-sided massacre. He had been surprised when Ichigo had put up the barrier, and even more so when he learned he couldn't teleport through it easily. He got through, but it explained a lot about what it was doing. He had teleportation magic, and that should have normally allowed him entry into areas without interference. And Ichigo had looked uneasily at the barrier. Judging by his look, it probably meant the barrier was a weak one, yet it gave him so much trouble to break through. He didn't want to know what a stronger one would be capable of. Then he had watched the Shinigami blast through the wall, using the distraction to get to the leader. It was great thinking on the boy's part, using the distraction to take out their leader. Then the leader had struck out. He had the Ring of Zeref, and he seemed to be able to use it to some degree. It was horrible to see it in action. Life was sucked out of the leader's own allies and used to fuel his attacks. Ichigo still managed to hold his own quite well though. That energy attack with his sword and his skills were impressive, far beyond what he himself would be capable of. Then things looked like they were going in the leader's favor. Enhancing his own sword with the power of the ring made him extremely deadly. He would have tried to lend a hand, but his orders were simple. Observe. He didn't like it, but he had to wait, hoping that Ichigo would be able to deal with the entire guild himself. He managed to get close enough for when the leader gave an explanation of his magic. So that was how he stole the ring. With that kind of magic, he just had to find someone who was familiar with the chairman and become him. While he wouldn't have his magical powers, he certainly would have the DNA, and that would mean that he would be able to bypass many of the ring's defenses without any trouble. Then the leader turned into that copy of someone Ichigo knew. Suddenly, Ichigo seemed to fight easily. He predicted the actions the leader made and managed to react quicker than he could before. A death blast and an energy blast connected, and then he saw the leader prepare to catch Ichigo off guard. The sudden reaction from the boy though was unexpected though. He struck out and killed the man. It seemed cold-hearted to him as the guy who he killed down looked exactly like his supposed mentor from what he could hear, yet he didn't hesitate for a second. It also made him wonder what kind of man his mentor was. But that was it. The leader was dead, and the rest of the Dark Guild was angry. Yet, Ichigo didn't move. Even as the entire guild went for him, he didn't move. He was frozen. Doran Bolt swore. The boy hadn't killed before, and now he had frozen up. It was the worst time to do so. He couldn't interfere, just like before. He was just to observe, no matter how much he wanted to get the kid out of there. And if Ichigo died, he was to retrieve the ring before they could escape. It was risky in case they tried again, but at least this time they would know how they stole it previously. But at the first Dark Mage reached Ichigo, his arm shot out and slashed his sword straight through the mage's chest. He couldn't hide his shock, so he was glad no one was nearby to see it. Ichigo had barely even looked and he had taken down one of the attackers without even a hint of hesitation that he had before. Things just escalated from there. No matter how many dark mages attacked at once, Ichigo cut them all down. Each one fell with unnatural ease. He couldn't help but feel afraid. If the dark mages tried magic, he just swiped it away with one of those energy swings, or he just ran straight into it, no regard for the damage he was taking. Fire, earth, ice, wood, stone, metal. He watched as a variety of different magic impacted against Ichigo, and still he kept moving. The scary thing was barely any of their attacks were wounding him. The odd one might graze him, but the majority all were shaken off like they were nothing. How much magical power did this kid even have? He was something like 13, yet he was using his own magical power as a shield to soften blows and even outright stop them. That was something mages had studied years to achieve, and he was doing it so effortlessly. Maybe it was instinct. That's what the boy seemed to be relying on now. Every attack of his had no fear in it and no sign of hesitation when he mercilessly tore apart the killed the guild. And his eyes. They had no life in them. He was merely fulfilling the request, letting those instincts deal with the enemy while he dealt with the pain and the guilt. Still, the boy was terrifying. Dark mages were running for it, yet he reached them before they could escape and sliced them apart. Blood was spilled by the gallon and Ichigo was almost covered in it. The Shinigami's Shiakushou had been torn to shreds. It seemed while Ichigo himself was perfectly fine, the Shiakushou had taken the brunt of the attacks. Pieces had been burnt off and it was almost hanging by a thread. It wasn't much of a surprise when it finally broke apart, scattering onto the ground. Even so, it was scary to look at. Anyone who saw this place would see the Shiakushou and know that this was done by a Shinigami. It would be just the message the council would want to send. The fight finally ended just as he was tired of watching the carnage. An entire guild of dark mages completely wiped out by one kid. The boy was covered in blood, the sword by his side colored red from it. The white shirt the boy had on was in similar state. It would look like his chest had been injured and that was his blood if you didn't know what happened. The bright orange haired was dulled too by the blood, and his hands were covered in it as much as his sword was. It truly made the kid look like a proper Shinigami with that much blood on his hands. He could see that Ichigo was standing still. With everyone eliminated, there was no one left to fight. Yet he didn't dare approach. It was irrational, he knew, yet he was scared. How much control did Ichigo have currently? Would he see him as an ally or just another enemy to eliminate? He wasn't sure what the answer would be. Their eyes locked, or he could see the gears turning in Ichigo's mind, even as he began taking steps towards him. His body was trying to act as if he was an enemy, but the mind was restraining it, listening to that little bit of reason still at the surface. Ichigo. He couldn't believe the fear in his voice. He was sure he could escape if Ichigo attacked, and then he would only need to wait for him to snap out of it. His voice was enough, luckily. Ichigo made to grab him when he froze, his eyes gaining more life in them as he recognized who was in front of him. Doran Bolt. Congratulations. He couldn't believe he was saying something like that in this situation. His mind was just drawing blanks of what to say. The mission is a success. Ichigo turned back to the Dark Guild and he could swear that he saw shock appear in the kid's eyes for a moment. He didn't understand why though. He was surely aware of everything around him, wasn't he? He watched as Ichigo marched over to the bodies and shut the eyes of each one of them. He didn't need to, but it showed something of the kid's character. Even if he killed them, he still believed they desired to rest peacefully, their eyes shut as if they were sleeping. Ichigo left the leader for last and bent down for the ring. He took it off the man's finger before heading back to Doran Bolt, the ring tucked away safely. Doran Bolt held out his hand, Ichigo taking it with his free hand. It was only then that he realized that Ichigo had yet to sheath his blade, the blood dripping from it. The world spun as Doran Bolt's magic activated and they reappeared in Era. Mission successful. Protector of the Fairies. Juoshiro left the council chambers both happy and sad. The trainee, Doran Bolt he believed he was called, had brought Ichigo back with a successful mission. Thanks to the young Shinigami's actions, the ring was now safe once more. They had increased security and added more enchantments to block the path. He had put up a few unique spells himself to ensure complete protection. Ichigo didn't speak much during the meeting unlike last time and left the talking to Doran Bolt mostly. He passed on how the Dark Guild had stolen the ring last time and recommended linking the barriers to the magic of the council alongside their own DNA. As seen before, DNA alone wasn't strong enough as it was still managed to be bypassed. After Ichigo had left, to head home maybe, Doran Bolt had given them his assessment of Ichigo. He had to say that the mission went better than he had thought. He had fears of leaving such matters to such a young mage, but he was also a Shinigami. There had been no other option. Well, that wasn't exactly true. They had other Shinigami available, but it was far better to use him, so they actually got something out of ignoring Fairy Tail's actions. It was the first time he had ever been glad that they caused so many problems. But it was quite a surprise when Doran Bolt reported that Ichigo seemed to lose focus and instead killed the rest of the Dark Guild on instinct alone. Some would say that would be impossible. It was. That kind of thing didn't help when you were outnumbered so much and didn't have a high enough power difference. There were some things that acted on instinct though. For them, it was always possible. Kisuke Urahara. When he got that letter from Kisuke, he knew the man had an agenda. He wouldn't have been after the ring, but he never did anything without considering all the consequences and results. If he had wanted Ichigo to do the mission, then it meant he wanted something to happen. Perhaps he wanted to accelerate the boy's growth using danger, or maybe he wanted to get him familiar with the concept of killing. Kisuke would have also known that they would have gotten something out of the arrangement as well. It meant that he didn't care what they found out about the boy because anything they learned wasn't important to lose. And learn something they had. Kisuke in his many years of service had been a scientist at heart. He was their top researcher and found out things that no one had ever thought to look for. Some of his technologies were still superior to anything the new head could create. The man was an undeniable genius. So when he suddenly disappeared, just a few years after Ishine himself vanished, it had been a shock. What had been so important that he left altogether? Then the letter appeared saying about his apprentice. Apprentice? Kisuke had never trained anyone, no matter how much he was begged. He never found them good enough and abandoned any he did test. Ichigo. What did the boy have that made him worthy of Kisuke's attention? He was certainly powerful for his age, and must have been close to calling forth his Zanpakuto. But there had been a nagging doubt in his mind. Was there another reason for training the boy? And now he had the answer. He understood why Kisuke left. The man had an experiment to conduct and wanted to see it through to the end. The results were just astounding. If Kisuke had done what he believed he had, then it meant the project had great potential. For years now, the army they had at their disposal could only do so much. Numbers was their greatest weapon, yet numbers didn't mean much a lot of the time. Mages were simply too powerful. The generals were their best troops, but while they were far stronger than most mages, they were still too few. Together, the mages had more collective power than they did. Hence, they needed more powerful troops. They needed a force capable of dealing with dark guilds and stopping legal guilds when they went too far. The time it took sometimes though was too long. Training could be short and it could be long. It all depended on the mage in question. But Ichigo just proved the results the project could do. He had a man to see. He opened the door to the Research and Development Institute and walked in. It hadn't been much until Kisuke remodeled the place. Now it was one of the crown jewels of the Magic Council. New weapons were created, old magic was rediscovered, new advances were made, it all happened here. Now though, it was under the management of Mayuri Kuratsuke, Kisuke's old second-in-command. The man wasn't as smart as Kisuke was, but he had fewer morals when it came to advancements. It was both good and bad, as it took a lot to control the man, but it was worth it to have the man on their side. Such a mind was wasted in prison or in a dark guild. He spotted the man quite easily. Mayuri had a habit of painting his face black with white stripes running down it. The man had turned his teeth golden since he last checked up on him, and he had gained a golden headdress which curved back down to the man's back. Mayuri spotted him almost immediately and quickly pushed the other scientists away. Chairman. Mayuri. The man nodded at him before looking back to some of his work. Will this take long? I'm in the middle of a very important experiment. I believe you will enjoy the news I have to give you. Hurry up and tell me, Mayuri said, most of his focus on the work in front of him. Do you remember an old research project of Kisuk's? Mayuri's entire body froze. I am not familiar with his projects. Juoshiro smiled at the man. Don't lie to me, Mayuri. I especially know you would have looked at certain ones. Ones that were kept private. Mayuri turned to face him. You are referring to his theories on holification, aren't you? We both know they weren't just theories. That's what they were classified as. The man was smart, Juoshiro admitted. He knew more than he was saying, either because of some lingering respect for Kisuk, or because he simply didn't want to give anything away. I need you to take control of a little project for the council. Since you have the old theories, then it means you should be able to do it in practice. Juoshiro pulled a letter out from his coat and handed it to Mayuri. You will find the coordinates of your new base. Instructions are within and you will be operating with a very small crew. Discreetness is required. Not even the rest of the council is to be informed of this task of yours. He could tell Mayuri knew what he meant. If the scientist was caught, he wouldn't have much help getting out of trouble. He had to act in secret and the project details had to never reach the rest of the council, even when it gets revealed. It was why he chose him for the job. Sometimes, morals had to be sacrificed. Mayuri opened the letter and gave it a quick glance. The Visored Project. I assume you want to combine those two magic. Mayuri took another look at the letter before sighed, the letter falling onto the table. It's impossible. Juoshiro shook his head. No. Kisuk did it, and now I want you to do it too. That was the key. Play on Mayuri's pride. He never liked being second best to Kisuk and would work that much harder to create the Visored. If Kisuk had done it, Mayuri would never allow himself to fail. I'll do it. Great. Juoshiro gave the man another smile before he left. Mayuri knew the limits he could push with the project, but it would also give him enough freedom to stay under their control. The Visored project had originally been thought up by Kisuk years ago but was scrapped. Now though, it would be recreated. They didn't have all the notes the man had and most of his theories were in his mind, but they had enough for Mayuri to work with. He dreaded to think of the lives that would be lost in the attempt to create these soldiers, but it would be worth it in the end. For the sake of the magical world. Everything he was doing was for peace. To keep it and to make sure nothing threatened it. As long as the world was kept safe, he could rot in hell happily. Protector of the Fairies. Makarov watched his children run around the guild, fighting and drinking far into the night. None of them were really his children, but then what linked a child to their parent? To him, they were all people he was desperate to protect, and he viewed each one as his own child. Laxus was sitting in the corner today. His grandson had been anxious for a few days now, waiting for Ichigo to get back. What mission had the boy taken? He didn't have much of a record of it and he had checked all the requests that were taken. Ichigo hadn't gone on any of them. Stranger though was that he didn't go with Laxus. It was the first time he had ever seen that happen before. They always teamed up on missions together. And why was Laxus so worried as well? He had tried to talk to his grandson but the boy refused to tell him what Ichigo was doing. It was great to see such loyalty between the two, but it made him even more worried. What was Ichigo doing that Laxus couldn't help him with? The boy had been enigma ever since he had first appeared. He had been young yet was so strong. He had managed to get Laxus to team up with him, the same boy who had never been part of a team before and refused any attempts to get him to join one. Add on to the fact that he had finally learned the boy's magic and he was truly an unusual mage. He had met one or two Shinigami himself, but they had always been much older. From what he had seen, a Shinigami isolated themselves for years, dedicating their heart and soul to understanding their own powers. Yet Ichigo had not done that and had instead chosen to join a guild. That hadn't even seemed to slow down his development as he was growing rapidly in strength too. It made him wonder who had taught the boy to make him such a prodigy. But part of him was always suspicious of the boy. That power just didn't seem natural. The boy didn't seem natural. For every part of him that trusted the boy, another part said to fear him. Makarov shook his head. What was he doing? He had seen the boy around the guild. He wasn't evil. He wasn't someone to fear, even if he was unusual. Ever since he had joined, Laxus had been participating in the guild more, even being a bit more cordial with the other members. It was like he was returning to his old self. And he had seen how Urza had acted around him. Despite being just a year younger, she looked up to the orange-haired boy. It had probably started when she had seen that he had a sword and hadn't known how to ask for pointers. She didn't even need to ask in the end. Ichigo had taken mercy on her and shown her how to use her sword. It had only happened a few days earlier, but Urza had already been seen continuously practicing either her swordsmanship skills or attempting to learn requip magic. He hadn't expected her to take Ichigo's suggestion so seriously, but she had. And she was picking up the magic at an incredible rate. Natsu had even taken a liking to Ichigo. He never told Natsu to stop attacking, no matter how much it annoyed him, and somehow Natsu had worked that out. The boy who challenged everyone all the time actually was respecting Ichigo's wishes and only attempting a fight once per day. He wondered what Guildarts would think of the boy. Speaking of that man, it sounded like he was almost home. The familiar rumbling sounds of the city moving filled his ears, and he could imagine the city rearranging itself to allow the man a straight path to the guild. Had Guildarts gotten stronger? His magical power seemed higher, but it was too high to have improved that much. Ah! Ichigo was with him, it seemed. Guildarts must have found the boy on his way back and escorted him the remainder of the way. It was strange comparing the two's magical power. While Guildarts had the most so far, Ichigo was a close second, and that would likely change in the coming years going by Ichigo's previous progress. The two mages approaching the guild though were practically monsters in terms of magical power. He hoped the rest of the guild wouldn't turn out like them. They were powerful, yes, but it was kind of frightening that someone had that much power, let alone two. He heard the door of the guild hall open and looked up towards the sound. Guildarts. So you're BA. His voice cut off as he saw the people in front of him. Guildarts was just like his normal self, but Ichigo. What had happened to the poor boy? Protector of the fairies. Guildarts strode along through the forest, running a hand through his orange hair as he slicked it back. He had been walking for an hour now and he couldn't work out how far he was from the guild. He let out a sigh over relief as he finally spotted the town in the distance and pulled his tattered cape further around him. It was getting late, and that meant it was getting colder. He didn't want to be out for much longer. Someone must have spotted him because he heard the sounds of a bell from the town. The town then went and completely shifted, leaving a straight road over to the guild from the town's entrance. He remembered the first time he had noticed. He had just arrived at the guild and then someone suddenly pointed out that he had walked down a straight long path through the city. It showed how absent-minded he was, that was for sure. He didn't know how much it cost the city to rebuild the town in such a way, but it had to be easier than trying to repair all the damage he caused by accident. It wasn't his fault that they put houses in his path. He felt sorry for the kid he could see approaching the town. Unless he was a fairy tale mage, he would have a long trip ahead of him to get to the other parts of the town. What was the boy covered in though? Wait. Was that blood? And that presence too. The boy was a mage, that was definite. With that much magic, it would have been waste to not become one. But why was he covered in blood? A sword was held in the boy's hand, completely ignoring the sheath on his back. Like the boy, the blade was covered in blood. If anything, there was more blood. Was the boy a murderer? No. Just watching the boy walk showed how lifeless he was. He was lost and didn't know how to find his way again. He remembered that look from long ago. It was once staring at him from a mirror. Leaving the boy on his own didn't sit well with him. No one should be left alone while looking like that. The orange-haired kid, whose hair was even brighter than his own, barely spared him a glance as he matched his strides with the boy's. Neither said anything, but he could tell that the boy was appreciating not being alone right now. They kept walking straight down the path till they reached the guild, where Ichigo stopped at the gates. You want to come in? Ichigo didn't move much, his left hand slowly raising to stare at the palm. Guildarts peered over the boy's shoulder to see what the fuss was about. He saw the guild mark quite quickly. Even with some of the blood covering it, he had imprinted that image into his brain. He was a fairy tale mage, and it made sense that he always needed to recognize the guild's emblem. That made him even more worried about the boy now. He wasn't just an ordinary stranger. When you joined Fairy Tale, you didn't join a guild. A guild was just a group of mages, working together and attracting business. Fairy Tale was a family. Your pain was the guild's pain. Your fears were the guild's fear. Your hopes, your dreams, your happiness, everything was shared, and there wasn't a single person in the guild who wouldn't put everything on the line for their friends and family. It was why he loved being the ace of Fairy Tale. He prided himself in being the man who they could turn to when they needed help, even if he was far away. Just a single word from the master and he would be on his way back, the job forgotten in his haste. As such, he felt more determined than now to help the boy. He could see himself in the kid and wouldn't be able to call himself the ace if he didn't at least try. He reached up and unfastened his cloak before he dropped it over the boy's shoulders. It wrapped around the kid and hid most of the blood from sight. You could still see a lot of it, and the look in the boy's eyes showed something was wrong, but it would at least lessen the image. There could be kids in the guild since he last joined, and he didn't want them to see the kid looking like that. He would have asked the boy to sheath the sword, but he doubted the boy would listen. The grip on his sword looked like a lifeline to the boy. Holding onto the blade must have been the only thing keeping the boy calm. Enough delays. He reached out a hand for the door and pushed it open lightly, being careful not to obliterate the door by accident. He was welcomed to the normal side of the guild, exactly as he remembered it. He could see the older members drinking and fighting amongst themselves while some kids hung out away from them. Kana, that sweet little girl who always greeted him, was chatting excitedly with a red-haired girl in armor. A pink-haired boy was fighting with a dark-haired one, the occasional fearful glance locked on the same red-haired girl as if she would go crazy on them at any moment. So the guild did get some more members. Kids too. Kana must have been happy to finally have people near her own age. He had felt sorry for her having to be lonely in the guild on her own. Laxus seemed different. More relaxed than before, something he hadn't expected. He had heard the rumors about the boy's father, so he had expected someone more angry and arrogant. This Laxus looked worried and was already looking towards him expectancy. What was he looking for? Guild arts. So you're BA. The master's voice cut off suddenly and he knew why. He could see the blood on the kid. Ichigo. So that was the kid's name. Helped having a name to put to a face. But this was a strange reaction from Laxus. It seemed he had found a friend since he had last stopped by the guild. Ichigo didn't move from his position, which forced Laxus to move to him, crossing the distance in an instant. No sooner had he done that had he began looking the boy over, worry all over the boy's face. This blood. What happened? Are you hurt? It's not mine. That was the first he had heard the boy speak. The voice sounded weak, but then he didn't even have that much life in him currently anyway. No one could when they were looking like that. Laxus swore as he grabbed the boy's hand, leading him out of the guild. Laxus, said Makarov. Wait one dash. Laxus spun round, pure fury on his face and all directed at Makarov. Guildarts could swear that he had never seen that expression on the boy's face before. It looked like he was blaming whatever had caused Ichigo to look like that on the master. What had the master done to warrant such a reaction? Makarov let out a sigh as Laxus and Ichigo left the guild before he turned towards the rest of the guild. Silence had fallen ever since they spotted Ichigo's condition, and all of them were looking at him expectantly. They wanted to know what was going on and who they needed to make pay. None of them would do anything if he didn't allow them, and the best way to do that was to not let them know what was going on. A few of their members were a bit impulsive at times, and he didn't want anything to happen to his children. He also had no idea what was wrong, so he couldn't even answer them if he asked. He gave a swift gaze towards Guildarts, who picked it up without any hesitation. Together, the two retreated away from the main guild hall and his office. They could talk freely there. Neither said a word at first. What could you say at a sight like that? Makarov himself had a big dilemma in his head. While he was worried about Ichigo, there were rules in the guild. One of these was to do with killing. It was forbidden. But when someone looked like that, he couldn't in good conscience abandon them. For all he knew, it could have been nothing more than an accident, and that could have left Ichigo being unable to cope with the situation. From Laxus's reaction, he wasn't sure if it had been part of the mission or not. He certainly hadn't expected Ichigo to look like that. Gildarts was the one to break that silence. So he's Ichigo, am I right? Makarov nodded. Joined about 2 years back. Became friends with Laxus straight after their first mission and have been together ever since. First time Ichigo ever did a mission without him was this one. What kind of guy is he? I couldn't get much of a read on him being so quiet and all. That there was an obvious sign that Gildart's trying to lighten the mood. He couldn't blame him. He wanted happier thoughts too. He's a Shinigami, Makarov commented. Talking about small details like that helped take his mind off the blood. Don't know if he has any family or not. He never told anyone his surname from what I've seen. And he naturally draws people towards him. So he's a charismatic kid. In a strange way. Makarov took a seat on his office's chair, relaxing as he talked more. He's still just a kid, but he seems to have gained the respect of quite a few of the mages in the guild, including all the younger ones. They see something in him perhaps that I haven't seen yet. It may be real or it may be all an act. I don't know enough about the boy yet. You mean you don't know the kid's past, even to a small extent, or even part of his character? The master ignored the shocked look on Gildarts's face. I normally do with anyone who joins the guild. Ichigo though. He's stubborn. He holds his past close to his chest, and the most I know about him is from watching him interacting with the others. And he's kind. Makarov nodded at his own comment. He knew that part was certain. He won't pick up something you dropped if you can get it easily yourself, for instance, but if people need help, he is there. He's protective even. I think that's where everything stems from. He doesn't smile that much. The smile Gildarts had begun to gain disappeared once more. He smiles much more than he did when he arrived, but he won't show it much with everyone else. He guards himself in a way similar to Urza does. Urza? Ah. I forgot you were gone for 3 years. Urza is the red-haired girl wearing armor. Gildarts nodded in understanding, Makarov taking that as a sign to continue. She hides her heart behind that armor of hers. Ichigo lets his emotions out more around those he cares about, but he keeps it locked away normally, a scowl disguising it. Makarov looked at Gildarts sadly. Do you know that this was the first time anyone in the guild ever saw him look weak? He always made sure he looked strong around the guild, even on the days where I could see sadness in his eyes. Those were the days normal people would avoid people to deal with the pain, yet he just buried it so no one would worry about him being missing. So he's the kind of guy who values everyone else before himself. Gildarts gave a short nod of approval. I can respect that, even if he forces himself to take on his pain alone. People with that kind of resolve are few and rare. He reminds me of Dash. You. Gildarts looked at the master in surprise. Me. Makarov smacked the man on his head. Of course. I don't make just anyone our ace after all. Power and heart are some of your greatest qualities. Gildarts couldn't help but blush from the praise. I am pretty awesome, aren't I? And you ruined it. Gildarts couldn't help but laugh at the master. The tension was gone for now, and they weren't worried as much about Ichigo thanks to the distraction. From the sound of it, Laxus was a good choice to help the kid, but he would drop by later. He had expected the sensation of killing before, and he was one of the few in the guild to have done so. No one would be better at relating to the kid than he would, especially with the nature of his magic. He nodded. Now all he had to do was find out where the boy lived. It shouldn't be too hard. All he had to do was search for that magical signature. With one that big, it wouldn't be that hard to do so. The sound of knocking interrupted them. Makarov looked at the door strangely before letting the person in. Gildarts recognized the man instantly. Yahima. A former mage of Fairy Tail and now a member of the Magic Council. He watched Makarov greet his old friend happily while he tried to work out why Yahima was here now. The two normally met up every so often from what he remembered, and he doubted that had changed much over the years. So why was Yahima here now? It could be nothing more than a coincidence, but over the years of dangerous S-class quests, you began to believe events were always related. and Yahima appearing suddenly the day Ichigo returned covered in blood. It left only one question. What job did Ichigo do for you? Makarov looked at him in confusion before he quickly reached the same conclusion and turned to Yahima in betrayal. What did you do? Nothing. The answer was hurried, hoping to calm down Makarov enough to listen. Then explain why you are here. Did Ichigo get back safely then? Yahima felt their glares intensify. Okay then. I'm sorry about this, but I thought it was only right that I tell you the details in person. What happened? Yahima shook his head in disgust. Politics. Protector of the fairies. Gildarts stepped past the trees as he tried to navigate through the forest safely. His magic had a habit of blowing up things in his way, and he really didn't want to have to pay for the forest to be replanted. They already seemed to have enough damage problems without him. He couldn't believe what Yahima had told him and Makarov. Ichigo had gone on a mission where he had to slaughter an entire guild, all to recover a single artifact. It wasn't much to go on about what happened, but it was the most Yahima could tell them without repercussions. Apparently, the mission had been news for him too. He knew the artifact was stolen, but not what they were doing about it. He said he had protested the killing when he heard of the request from the chairman, and even more so with a kid doing the request. The chairman hadn't budged though and had sent Ichigo a request for a job. He said it was for a variety of reasons, including showing their power in the world and to warn other dark guilds. Using a Shinigami was to avoid being fully linked to killing themselves. When he retired eventually, there was no way he would ever get involved with the council. They were trying to be fair, and they were for most, but they had a hard job. They made hard decisions. It wasn't right to send a kid though. They must have had Shinigami in their army, so why not use one of them? They must have had another interest that the chairman kept secret. And people wondered why Fairy Tail disagreed with a lot of the council's decisions. The sound of a blast flew through the forest. What caused that? It sounded like it was near Ichigo, judging by how far Ichigo appeared to be and how close that sound had been. Abandoning his leisurely stroll, he broke out into a run. He reached the sound in no time at all and reached what looked like a newly made clearing. From the look of the stumps, it must have been new. The trees were lying on the ground, a long cut in each one straight through the trunk. Sword slash? It looked right, but he decided against it when he noticed Ichigo was standing in the middle of the new clearing. You couldn't cut trees like that at that distance unless you trained for a lot longer, and no matter how much magic Ichigo had, he didn't believe the boy could do something like that yet. On the stumps of the trees seemed to be some lingering energy. Some was new and some was slightly older, maybe 10 minutes at most. Looking at Ichigo again, he noticed that there was a faint amount of light blue energy around the blade, slowly fading off the blade like smoke. An energy attack of some kind? It would explain the range, and it seemed to match. That was impressive. He raised a hand towards Ichigo in greeting. Hey. Ichigo. Ichigo raised an eyebrow at the man's approach. And you are? You never heard any rumors about me? Gildarts put his hand over his heart in mock pain. I'm hurt. Ichigo looked at him blankly still, causing Gildarts to sigh. I'm Gildarts. Gildarts Clive. Ah. You're the current ace. You say that like I won't be the ace for long. Ichigo gave him a weak smile, obviously forced. I'll take that spot from you soon enough. Gildarts laughed at the challenge. Well then, I'll look forward to it. You better be ready for the fight of your life when you eventually challenge me. Ichigo nodded before Gildarts suddenly dropped down next to where he had been standing. Gildarts shot out a hand and forced Ichigo off his feet, causing him to land on the floor and end up in a sitting position. Hey Dash. Laxus helped you get rid of all the blood, didn't he? Ichigo didn't meet Gildarts' eyes. Yeah. It wasn't much of a big deal. You're not the best at lying, are you? Gildarts picked up a rock before he obliterated it before Ichigo's eyes. What was that? Crash. It's my main magic and one of the most destructive magic out there. I can't even control it perfectly, so I need to be careful not to destroy anything I touch. It's hard to control. Gildarts looked down at the crushed pieces of stone in his hand. I can use this in many ways. Soften the ground and attacks can become weaker. If they attack you with magic, just blast it to pieces. Simply right? What's not to understand? Gildarts raised his hand at one of the trees and it suddenly shattered, part of the trunk smashed into pieces. Did you see that? There's a lot of range with it. How far can something like this go? What if you lose focus? How far would the destruction go before it hits something? A fist clenched. I was young. Not much older than you, but a lot more arrogant. I was so sure of my own power and I believed I was invincible. I almost never lost, and even then, I rationalized to myself that it was because I was younger than them. Gildarts turned to look at Ichigo, sadness and shame in his eyes. I went on a mission. It wasn't anything special. Just a few bandits. Problem was that there was more than I thought. Still, I believed I could handle it. A fake laugh broke out of his throat. I handled it for sure. I took down most of the group, but the last caught me by surprise. Waited until I was distracted and tried to gut me with a blade. Gildarts raised his hands to look at them. I just reacted. I spun round and punched him straight in the chest. Problem was that I didn't have the control I have nowadays. My emotions were running wild. I was scared and just reacted. And so did my magic. The body was ripped apart and the insides scattered everywhere. I was covered in the man's blood as it all sprayed outwards, limbs flying off in any direction while the chest liquefied under the strain. I didn't remove my fist from his chest until an hour later, and not a single bandit tried to run while I was recovering. I think they were as scared of me as I was. Gildarts suddenly brought his hands to his face and slapped himself. He seemed to return to how he had acted first after that. You probably know why I'm telling you this, don't you? Ichigo nodded silently. Gildarts raised a hand and patted the boy on the back. My point is that if you ever need someone to talk to, then you can talk to me. I can relate to what you're going through. Ichigo struggled with words for a moment before he finally found his voice. Does it ever go away? Do you ever stop feeling like a monster? No. There was no point lying about that. He still saw that man in his dreams after all. It stays with you forever. What I like to remember is what I learned. I stopped being arrogant and dedicated myself to making sure I never killed anyone again. What do you want to learn from your experience? You can never let it stop you moving forward. Trust me, I tried to wallow in shame but it wasn't good. It made the people around me worried, and you aren't the type of person to want others to worry about yourself, are you? Ichigo shook his head. Keep moving forward. If you keep looking back, you'll just keep falling down. You can't walk backwards and expect to see where you're going. Hold your head high and make sure you can learn from the experience. Don't let their blood drown you in shame. He saw a quick smile appear on the boy's face before it vanished as quickly as it had appeared. It was better than he had hoped for, though. He'd take that as a job well done. He slowly pushed himself back up to his feet. Remember what I told you and you'll be fine. And if you ever want anyone to talk to, ask the master for my address. I'll be in town for a few weeks before I head out again on some more missions, and then I'll be gone for a while once more. He began leaving, a hand raised in farewell when a thought crossed his mind. He was incredibly curious at the moment. Hey Ichigo. What were you doing here anyway? Ichigo raised his sword over his head, energy gathering around it before the boy swung. The energy flew off in a crescent shape before it slashed straight through the tree he had aimed at. Becoming stronger so I can move forward. Gildarts smiled at the boy. Now you're getting it. Protector of the Fairies. Rewriting the team. Laxus was jumping for joy. Ichigo had to do his best to ignore his actions, but it was hard. He couldn't blame the guy though. He had been nominated for the S-Class trials after years of work, and now he had the chance. The S-Class trials fairy tale happened around once a year. No one could take S-Class quests without an S-Class mage, and this was the only way to become one, no matter how strong you were. The master had certain qualities he said he looked for in an S-Class mage, which is why he only allowed one person maximum to pass per year, and there wasn't always a winner either. There had been plenty of years previously where no one had managed to pass the trials, and over the years, the previous S-Class mages had stepped down, not capable of keeping up with the tough missions anymore. Gildarts was the only S-class mage fairy tale had left, and Laxus seemed determined to change that. It was almost a given that Laxus would pass to him. He was powerful, and while he could act arrogant, the master knew he was smart. He was capable of any jobs he would end up taking as an S-class mage. It had been a surprise when Laxus told him that the S-class trials required pairs. One of the two was the one who took the exam and would pass, while the other assisted them in their tasks. And for this task, he was helping Laxus. There weren't many people in the running at the moment, and there hadn't been for a while. Most of the applicants were people he hadn't interacted with much, and were normally some of the newer mages who wanted the thrill of the harder jobs. And compared to Laxus, they were weak. Things were looking good. They had both grown stronger over the year. Laxus had started delving more and more into Lightning Dragon Slayer magic, hoping to master its power and gain control over Dragon Force. Right now, it always caused him to enter a sort of berserker state. While his physical abilities increased dramatically, it wasn't what he was aiming for. One of the greatest powers of lightning was its speed, and the berserker state actually slowed him down. As for himself, he had gotten further and further into Kidou and into mastering that attack he had used during the attack of the Dark Guild. Ever since his talk with Gildarts, he had felt something inside him. It was like a voice was calling out to him, trying to get him to hear its voice. Sometimes he thought he could hear someone screaming for him, only to find no one was there. Other times he would find the voice more like a whisper, trying to tell him something. If he wasn't a Shinigami, he would have believed he was going insane. The truth was that it was a good sign. When a Shinigami began to hear the voice of someone else inside them, it meant that their Zanpakuto was trying to contact them. He must have done something to make his Zanpakuto approve of him, and because of that, it had began to reach out to him. It seemed like only one thing was missing, and he was sure it was to do with the attack. It always felt like something was missing. Like it was the last hurdle to overcome, and then he would be ready to hear his Zanpakuto's name. As for his Kidou progress, he wanted to get to the point where he never had to kill if he didn't have to. The council hadn't made any requests like that one since then, but if they did, he would refuse them. He wasn't going to kill their enemies. Not again. So if he couldn't kill them, capturing them was ever more essential. Bakuto spells were essential, whether it was to restrain the enemy or to hold them back safely. But knowing them wasn't enough either. He had been stuck before when he fought the Dark Guild. He hadn't spent enough time with the Kidou he knew to get them to work without the chant, and that had cost him. He could have had the situation over with much quicker if he had fired off a spell when the leader was distracted. That had caused him to spend weeks going over the same spell again and again, understanding every detail he could about it till he could do it without the chant and not lose any power. Of course, that meant now that the chant version would be dramatically more powerful. He would have to be careful when he used it, as he hadn't dared try in the surrounding area. Who knows how much damage it could cause? Kisuk's words ran in his head from his training. He had always said how Shinigami preferred certain spells over others, and now he understood why no Shinigami ever mastered all the spells available. It wasn't possible. The complexity of each spell was completely different as you got higher up, and that meant it became harder and harder to understand. Kisuk had hinted to him that it would be a bit different for him because of the nature of his power, and he was probably right, like always. Magical power was crucial with the higher spells, and he had noticed that as he got to higher level spells, they became easier than the ones at lower levels, or at least with control. He had a lot less backfires than before. They still took forever to learn though, and he doubted they were done either. While Kidou spells were hard to manipulate, it could be done and could result in something completely new. And then there was the whole theory on creating your own Kidou. Kisuk had created a few of his own, and he had told him many tales of the Shinigami who had done so. One man had been talented enough to ever create a Kidou that bent time to his will, and another for space. Ichigo left those thoughts for now and focused on others. Speaking of other thoughts, he had wondered quite often why the council had accepted his refusal for assassination missions so easily. They had explained in great detail why he was crucial, as he could kill without their repercussions, and then suddenly, they didn't mind if he didn't take those missions. There had been 5 more missions from them over the year, each appearing just after a large amount of complaints arrived at the guild. It made things easier to slip away, at least, as he could tell the master didn't approve of the missions. He doubted the master would approve of the darker sides of these missions either. In fact, the master had gotten colder to him over the year. Well, not so much colder, rather more cautious and guarded. It was like he was trying to reassess him and try to figure out if he was a threat or not. Each time he returned from a council mission, he saw the look the master shot at him when he wasn't looking. It was like he was betraying Fairy Tale by becoming a lapdog of the council. It was likely that the master only acted like this because of the state he returned in after the first mission. The fact that he continued them after something that looked to be a horrific incident must have scared the master into thinking there was something wrong with him. If he had been the master, he would have been interrogating him about why he continued the missions. He would question his sanity and wonder if he had perhaps enjoyed the thrill of taking someone's life. What thrill though? He may have killed the Dark Guild, but he hadn't enjoyed it. They would have done if they were in his place. Laxus had tried to persuade him to tell the master why he was taking these jobs and to get the master to keep the guild under control, but he stopped his friend before he could. He understood a bit more about why the master didn't stop the guild. He didn't like it, but he understood. And he was happy to defend the guild without them knowing. He was like their silent protector in a way. Their ace in the shadows. The ace in the shadows. It had a nice ring to it, he thought. It would have suited him more though if he still had his old Xiakushao. He missed that old thing, but he hadn't bothered to try and replace it. The thought of wearing it just made him shake in anger and fear. He had been merciless against the Dark Guild, just like a true Shinigami of the afterlife. He didn't want to be like that if he could help it. So the Xiakushao was gone, or what was left of it was gone. It was almost in pieces anyway, so it would have had to go anyway. Repairing it would have involved replacing most of the material, so it would have been the same thing as buying a new one. Ichigo gave a quick glance around the guild. Nothing had changed much, though things were noisier, that was for sure. There had been a load of new members joining, some closer to his own age than others. The Strauss siblings were an interesting bunch. The oldest was a 13-year-old called Myra Jane, and the best word to describe her would be goth. He doubted any other word suited her as well as that one did. She had a habit of wearing skimpy clothing, all colored black with a mix of skulls and demonic features over the outfit. As for her personality, she suited the tomboy stereotype pretty well. She was loud and temperamental, bad-mouthing most of the people in the guild. She was already starting to get a reputation inside and outside the guild as the demon of Fairy Tale. Strangely, she was the only one who could get a rise out of Urza. Something about her set the girl off and caused the two to constantly break into fights, destroying parts of the guild in the process. And he had such high hopes for Urza too. Elfman was the second oldest. He was extremely shy and seemed to feel inferior to his siblings despite the encouragements of the people around him. He was a kind person though, despite his self-esteem problems. He was normally found wearing blue suit that seemed far too smart for a place like Fairy Tale. Finally, you had the youngest of the three. A sweet girl named Lysina. She seemed to be able to adapt to anyone and you could find it very hard to get annoyed at her. She had taken to hanging around Natsu a lot and had even helped him raise the egg the boy had found. Apparently it had supposed to have been a dragon egg, but sometime you had to think carefully over Natsu's words. He wasn't the smartest kid after all. A flying blue cat had hatched from the egg instead, quickly called Happy. It was a strange sight to see, as he was sure he hadn't seen any cats that came from eggs after all. Together, the three siblings formed a three-man team. The Takeover Siblings. Their white hair hadn't been their only common feature. They were all users of takeover magic, as their team name suggested. Lysina used Animal Soul, allowing her to take on the power of many different animals. She could even manage a full transformation of the ones she knew so far, which her brother was really jealous of. He could understand why Elfman was jealous. He was the only one of his siblings who couldn't do a full takeover, but he had nothing to be ashamed of in his opinion. Elfman's beast soul normally got its power from monsters and other beasts, and hence was a lot tougher to master than Animal Soul. He would get it eventually, he believed. Myra Jane though had taken on one of the toughest takeover types around. Satan Soul. She had only one form so far, but she could fully transform into it. The demon must have been weak or had already been defeated, because at her current level, she shouldn't have been able to defeat the demon without any magic involved. It was a strong one. Not at one of Zeref's level demons, but it was still powerful, and it was bound to get stronger as time went by. The team of the siblings was effective though, and it was rare to see a team of mages with the same magic. When that happened, it normally did result in a strong team. They weren't the only new team around. Shadow Gear was created not long after, consisting of the other 3 new members. The first of the 3 was Droy, who had the top of his black hair shaped into the sprouting leaves of a plant. Going by the odd hairstyle, it was safe to assume his magic revolved around plants somehow. The second was a hyperactive kid called Jet. The kid had orange hair that rivaled his own and was constantly moving about from one foot to another, unable to stay still. He was fast though when he used magic, which was to be expected when from a high-speed magic user. The last of the new members to join was a younger blue-haired girl called Levy, about 3 years younger than him. That made her listen his age if he was correct. Despite being invited into Shadow Gear, he could tell she didn't feel comfortable in the group. One of the boys had wanted her there simply to get a group of 3 that wasn't all male, and the other thought she was weak. It was easy to see why they thought so. The girl had picked an interesting type of magic known as solid script. Letter magic were some of the most complex magic that existed. It was hard to grasp for many, and it relied more on your imagination and mind than any others did, even molding magic. It could take a lot of work to even master, and it was hard to use in combat until you reached a decent stage, but Levy seemed to be capable of that from the look of it. She could already create a few words without any problems, and if you could create one, you could create any. It all depended on how you wanted to use that word. A simple word like fire could cause fire to be launched at the enemy, but it could also be used to provide a constant light source. It was all about your mind and what the word was meaning to you at the time. He doubted the team had been on many tough missions yet, and that was why they still thought she was weak. They would change their minds soon enough, but Levy seemed to be having her self-esteem drop from their constant presence. Ichigo sighed. Should he interfere? It wasn't good if she crawled too far into her shell. She had a lot of potential as a mage after all. Hey Laxus. When's the exam again? Laxus looked towards him. In about a week. Annoying though, as we can't go on any tough missions in that time in case we get injured. That's good. Ichigo pushed up out of his seat and go to his feet. I'll grab an easier one then. We're taking a 3rd person with us today. Wait, Laxus blinked before chasing after him. What do you mean a 3rd person? Ichigo glanced at his friend from the corner of his eye as he scanned the mission board. What do you think I meant? You helped me get settled into the guild on my first job. I'm repaying that favor by helping the newer generation. Laxus said, his eyes glanced towards Levy. The blue-haired girl? But she's so weak. For now. Ichigo grabbed a simple mission and began to walk towards Levy. Wasn't everyone weak at one stage though? Laxus looked like he wanted to say more, but Ichigo reached Levy before he could. The blue-haired girl looked up from her book at him in confusion. The girl blushed from nervousness at the 2 towering over her. Hello. You haven't done a proper mission yet, have you? No, the girl squeaked out. Ichigo dropped the request next to her to let her look at it. We're heading out for an easy one today. You're coming alone too. Me. The blue-haired girl shook her head quickly. But I'm not strong enough, and I'll get you in trouble and dash. Some battle experience will fix that right up, interrupted Ichigo. Best way to get stronger? Fight a whole load of enemies. Levy still seemed unsure, causing Ichigo to resort to other ideas to persuade her. You like books, right? The girl nodded. Good then. Ichigo pointed at the reward. Look at all this money. You could spend the entire thing on books if you wanted. All you need to do is join us. That was all it took for the girl's willpower to disappear. The moment he finished the sentence, she was already up and waiting for them by the door. Let's go. Protector of the Fairies. How far are we? How should I know? You have the map. You gave me the wrong map. It was perfectly fine when we left. There's a freaking desert on this map. All I see is snow. Maybe it's a snowy desert. Ichigo opened his mouth to utter a retort when he realized that what the man had said could actually be possible. Magic did strange things sometimes. This mission had taken them near the edge of Mt. Hakobi, so it wasn't that far from Magnolia. The problems had occurred when they tried to follow the wrong map and then try and look for the right mountain. All the request had said was to get rid of a group of Vulcans based at the edge of a mountain. Now if they had said which mountain, it may have gone smoother. How hard was it to say, the mountain on the far left, or, the mountain by the forest? Anything to narrow the results down. So now they had to spend way too much time in the snow as they checked each mountain one by one. Then they went and lost count and forgot which mountains they had checked and ended up walking around in circles. Levi seemed to be relaxing more in the atmosphere, occasionally laughing at him and Laxus as they once again tried to blame the other for the misfortune. In the end, they just hoped the Vulcans would appear themselves. They had made enough noise for them to hear them and now they just had to wait hopefully. He wondered what the Vulcans had done or had planned to do, but knowing their nature, it could be bad. Vulcans were pests, using takeover magic to steal the bodies of humans to prolong their life and to cause more havoc. The best way to get rid of them was to beat them into the ground and hope their latest host hadn't been absorbed for too long. If they were lucky, the Vulcan would disappear and the human form would reappear. How many are there anyway? Asked Levi, shivering from the cold. They really should have brought warmer clothing before they left. I think about 7, answered Laxus. Vulcans are dangerous in a big group, but this isn't enough to cause any big problems. Laxus is right. Ichigo shifted his sword slightly on his shoulder as he kept an eye out for Vulcans. Me and Laxus can handle 3 each and we'll leave 1 for you to fight against. Better to get a grip on fighting one first of all before you move up to a group on your own. Levi nodded quickly. There was no way she wanted to fight more than 1 Vulcan at this stage. They were said to be tough creatures and were best left to groups as it reduced the danger if you were taken over. Laxus suddenly froze, sniffing the air. Something's nearby. Ichigo raised an eyebrow at his statement. How do you know? That little gift of mine doesn't just alter my ability to fight. Ah. So that was what it was. Natsu had always seemed to have a good sense of smell, and now that Laxus was practicing more with Dragon Slayer magic, it seemed he was gaining that sense of smell too. Ichigo slowly raised his hand to the hilt of his sword, his feet moving into a stance. Laxus did the same, sparks of lightning flickering over his body. Then the Vulcans appeared. 2 jumped out of the snow straight at Ichigo while another 2 intercepted Laxus from above, their physical strength allowing them to jump quite high. A 5th one shot out from behind them, making a beeline for Levi. Ichigo didn't have time to work out where the other 2 Vulcans were. Pick your targets. They just had to fight now. As one Vulcan went to punch him, he brought out his sword and blocked the strike, sending the Vulcan back with a powerful kick. Spinning, his sword was raised high and fired off a crescent blast of energy at the 2nd Vulcan. It exploded against the Vulcan and brought him down to 1 knee. Before he could take advantage of the Vulcan's weakness, the 1st Vulcan charged back at him, forcing him away from his brethren. They were too close to each other now though. He quickly generated yellow light into his palm and drew a large triangle in front of him, the 3 corners glowing brightly with large crackling spheres slowly changing to form beaks aimed at the Vulcans. Bakuda number 30, Shitosu Sansen. The 3 beaks fired at the Vulcans, 2 of them connecting with one of them while the 3rd connected with the other. They were both sent flying back and crashed into the rocks behind them, the Bakuda holding them in place. Ichigo wasn't done though as he raised his sword horizontally in front of him. Another yellow orb of energy was generated in front of him before it expanded along the blade itself. Hada number 32, Bukasen. The yellow energy blasted outwards towards the Vulcans. With the Bakuda still holding strong, they were unable to move and were subsequently taken out in the blast. As the energy from the attack cleared, you could see the human forms of the takeover victims. 2 down and done relatively quickly. He wondered how Laxus and Levi were getting on. Laxus swiftly dodged the 2 Vulcans attacking him before activating what Ichigo recognized as Laxus's lightning form. He shot straight past the 2 Vulcans and danced between their strikes, causing a few of them to hit each other. That distraction was all Laxus needed to get bored with playing with them. From his hand fired small spheres of lightning at the Vulcans, bombarding them with the lightning strikes. While they were trying to block all the attacks, Laxus was already behind them and launched 2 simultaneous strikes at the Vulcans, bringing both down to the ground. Like with Ichigo's opponents, The Vulcans slowly shifted back to reveal the humans underneath. It definitely looked like they had been recently absorbed, though some may have been close to the point of no return as they looked incredibly weak. Levy, despite her troubles, was managing to at least hold her ground. She was mixing between using the word guard to block the Vulcan's attacks and the word fire to burn the Vulcan. The Vulcan was having a hard time, it seemed, but Levy looked to be running out of steam. She must have been using far too much magic when she used the word guard, because she desperately didn't want to get hurt, and she obviously wasn't completely set on harming the creature, so fire was less effective than it could be. He wouldn't interfere in the girl's fight though unless she was in serious danger. She needed to do this alone or she would never progress further. Being forced to not even beat the one assigned to her would crush her self-esteem no matter what they tried. The Vulcan suddenly raised both fists and slammed them down as the newest guard appeared, finally breaking the word barrier. It shot forward in an attempt to grab the girl only to fall into the ground. Levy smiled as she kicked a bit of the snow by her feet away. Underneath the snow, you could just about see the outline of a letter. Solid script, hole. Finish the Vulcan off, Levy. The girl nodded before she waved her hand out. Above the hole appeared the word rock, before the word fell down straight onto the Vulcan's head, knocking the creature out. They could see from here that there was no chance to the Vulcan though. It seemed it was too late for the poor soul that Vulcan had absorbed. There was only so long the original form of the human was retained before the Vulcan completely destroyed it, and it seems for this one that had already happened. Still, this was only 5. The request said about seeing 7, so where were the other 2? Laxus. Levy. Stay on guard. Something's still coming. I'm sure of it. Their cautiousness was rewarded when another Vulcan appeared straight in front of them and launched an attack on him and Laxus. Still, they were still missing one more. Where was it? Then suddenly, he felt everything freeze as he took in the silhouette of the final Vulcan above them nearer Levy. A massive boulder had already left its hands and was rolling down at them. It was already too close. They should have noticed it, but something like that wasn't a threat for him and Laxus. They either could dodge or even shatter the boulder when it reached them, so that was never a danger normally. But Levy was far too close to the line of fire and she hadn't noticed. Add on that she was low on magic and she wouldn't be able to cast a spell strong enough to stop the boulder. She wouldn't be fast enough to dodge either, and he wouldn't be able to pull her out of the way in time. Laxus was fast enough, but he hadn't noticed, it seemed, too absorbed in fighting the Vulcan. There was no time to shout out to him and to save Levy from being crushed by the rolling boulder. Kiddo still would take too long to cast, even if it would travel fast enough. Only that energy attack from his sword had a chance, but it wouldn't be able to cut a boulder like that one. The attack wasn't strong enough, or at least not yet. Who says it can't? That voice. He had heard it many times over the year. Could this mean? Did you know that an attack is far more powerful when you know its name than when you do not? Those words were familiar. It was like he already knew this and was remembering it for the first time in a long while. You know the name Ichigo. Tell me the name of this attack, and I will tell you mine. Ichigo had already managed to pull back from the Vulcan. The others just noticed the danger Levy was in. The fear was evident on her face, yet he felt calm as he raised his sword. Almost at peace. With one swing, he shouted just 2 words. Getchuga Tenshou. He hadn't completely known what to expect. The form he had been using without the technique's name had never been that big. It was just a wave of energy. This one though was different. The energy flowing off it was massive and it cut through the boulder like it was nothing. Even the ground had been destroyed, a large crevice in a line following behind the attack. Knowing the attack's name really did change the power behind it. Laxus took advantage of the Vulcan's surprise and took them both out as Ichigo stared at the attack. Getchuga Tenshou. Nice name for a spell. And very destructive too. He would have to be careful not to use this too close to residential areas. The amount of damage this thing caused would really not help the guild in the future. Very good, Ichigo. Now then, I believe I promised you my name. Listen carefully. My name is... The voice paused, causing Ichigo to grow tense in anticipation. It seemed like his Zanpakuto wanted to be dramatic about it. Zanjitsu. Protector of the Fairies. Did you see me? asked Levi for the third time. I can't believe I did it. I actually won. It was just amazing, answered Ichigo for her, ruffling the girl's hair to her annoyance. Levi pouted at his actions. Yeah. It's a nice feeling, isn't it? Levi glanced up at Laxus, who was looking at her with an inkling of respect. You did good, kid. That made Levi smiled ever more. How often did he hear Laxus praise other people apart from them? Not very much. To acknowledge her potential was a surprise in itself. Levi had done better than he had expected. To have hidden the word hole under the snow and to catch the Vulcan in it was smart. Now all she had to do was continue progressing with her magic. Maybe she could find a focus for her magic to amplify its strength or something to apply the words to. He doubted the words had to be as big as they were most of the time, so it made sense that she would be able to adjust the size with practice. Hole could be far bigger to trap enemies easily, while something like guard could be shrunk to a more manageable size. If she applied the guard word to her clothes, for instance, she could properly create a defensive armor for herself. Or maybe another word would be better. It would require Levi to experiment a lot with what worked best. Still, he was kind of envious of Shadow Gear. They had a great talent on their team, and yet they didn't even realize her potential. If they didn't recognize it, he guessed that meant he was perfectly within his rights to steal her from the two boys. Hey Levi. The girl snapped her head round to look up at him. How about you join our team? Become a part of Team Fairy with me and Laxus. A subtle glance to the side showed that Laxus wasn't opposed to the idea. Levi really did a good job at impressing him. Levi looked like she wanted to say yes, but something was stopping her. He had a good idea of what. You don't want to abandon your old team. It wouldn't be right, she said sadly. I see. He wasn't giving up though. Then be a part of both. Huh. A pair of eyes widened at his words in confusion. I said you can be a part of both teams. By all means, continue doing missions with Jet and Droy. But join us for training and the tougher missions. But You're stronger than you think, Levi, and right now you will be stuck until the others catch up. If you went on the kind of mission you went on today with Jet and Droy, they wouldn't survive, and you might not have either without us. But with us, you can grow stronger instead of waiting for them to catch up. Laxus nodded his agreement. Ichigo's right. You've got talent, and I would hate to see it wasted. If you can do something, aim for the top with it, and don't stop for anything. So. Ichigo looked at Levi expectantly. Are you in? Levi looked at her feet for a moment, so it was impossible to see what was going through her mind. Then she suddenly shot her head back up and nodded with enthusiasm. I'll join. Good news. Ichigo looked over to Laxus. That brings our numbers up to 3. Welcome to the group, Levi. Just make sure not to annoy this idiot when he's practicing, or he'll blow a hole in the wall. Hey. That was one time. I haven't done that since. Say that to the forest. Say that again. I dare you. Levi laughed at the two boys arguing. She could tell she was going to enjoy being a part of Team Fairy. I still get the reward, don't I? Oh yeah. Ichigo grabbed the reward they had received and chucked it at her. Spend it wisely. The girl nodded. He just wished he had realized the problems this would have caused in advance. It would save some headaches in the future. For now, things were good. Laxus had his S-class trial in a few days, and he would ensure the guy passed, no matter what. He would make sure Levi realized her full potential with her magic, and he would finally get to see his Zanpakuto's released form. Zanjutsu. He liked that name. He wondered what the spirit of his sword looked like. He would find out in time though, he was sure of that. He had finally learned the technique's name and was getting strong enough to protect the people around him. Yes, things were good. He hoped things would stay like this forever as they approached the guild. Team Fairy without a care in the world. Of course, all good things eventually would end. If not now, then later. For now though, he would enjoy this time. He wasn't ever going to forget it. Protector of the Fairies. Race for S-Class. Be back soon, called Levi as the boat pulled out of the harbor. Ichigo waved back, glad their new teammate had turned up to wish them luck with Laxus's S-class trial. Laxus seemed happy as well, even if he tried to hide it. The master waited till the boat was out at sea before he appeared, ready to announce where the S-class trials were this year. He had decided to keep it a surprise this time since there were fewer teams. Apart from them, there was only 3 other teams taking part, and most of them were all either some new older members or just old regular members giving it one last try. The master stared down at them all before he coughed lightly, clearing his throat. I'm sure many of you have been wondering about this year's destination for the S-class trials. Ichigo glanced at Laxus, who looked just as curious as he was. This year, I have decided to hold the task somewhere special to us. An island fitting for the S-class trials of Fairy Tail. Laxus opened his mouth in shock. Did he know where they were going? Why would it be such a surprise? This year, the trials shall take place at our holy ground. We are going to Tenro Island. Ichigo leaned next closer to Laxus. Tenro Island. It's the final resting place of Mavis Vermilion, the first master of Fairy Tail. The first master? He had always thought she would have had a grave nearer the guild. So Tenro was her final resting place, was it? The climate will be quite warm, said the master, catching his attention once more. As such, you should be prepared for the intense heat. Wasn't it winter right now? How hot could that island be? Be prepared, for the S-class trials begin the moment the island comes into sight. Only one can win. I will wait for you all at the base of the tree of the island. One of the other participants raised her hand. How will we know which tree to search for? The master chuckled. Trust me, you'll know what tree I mean. He suddenly stopped laughing and looked around the group seriously. You will have only 1 hour when the island comes into sight. That may seem like plenty, but there are dangers on this island. Creatures of all types reside here, and some that were brought here specifically for this trial. They won't leave their assigned areas, but be cautious. These creatures aren't to be underestimated. They will push you to your limits. The master smiled. Good luck. Then he was gone, vanishing into thin air. Thought projection? Was he already at the island? Laxus nodded. Looks like it. Else how would we find him if we go the moment the boat docks? Gramps isn't the fastest person in the world, especially with his age. I see. Ichigo glanced around at the other participants. None of them were panicking at the master's sudden disappearance. That was good. If they didn't realize what the master had done, why would they have even been brought here in the first place? It looked like it would be a race to the supposed tree. The first one there would be one who wins. If it came down to speed though, Laxus had it in the bag. The problem was the dangers on the island. What kinds of creatures would exist there and what ones had been brought in? This looks fun, Laxus whispered. Looking up at his friend revealed a smile on the blonde teen's face. I doubt any mission we've done before will be as tough as this one. You're right. Ichigo peered off the side of the board, hoping to see some sign of the island in the distance. But we won't fail. After this, you can get us on the good missions. Already got 1 or 2 in mind. How does battling a wyvern sound? Ichigo raised an eyebrow. You aren't serious. I thought it sounded too easy as well. How about a mission with 5 of them? One's fine, Ichigo quickly answered, waving his hands in front of him in an attempt to distract Laxus from his quest ideas. What's wrong with 5 wyverns? They can fly and are a pain to defeat. We only encountered one once and we had to run when it started chasing us. That was years ago. It was last month. Details. Protector of the Fairies. The island finally began to come into view an hour later. Exactly as the master had said, it had gotten hotter and hotter till the climate felt like they were in the desert or something. Most people had been forced to switch to shorts or something similar and had abandoned all excess clothing, else they would have found themselves roasting alive. Tenro Island. It looked slightly strange to the naked eye. There were steep areas of rocks along different areas of the island, yet it was still covered in forests of vegetation. A large rock platform stretched up in the middle of the island and formed its own landmass. It was on this landmass that housed the tree the master was talking about. There was no other obvious one like this. The trunk seemed to be in multiple parts, all spiraling round each other to reach the top where they then spread out and became branches to hold the leaves above. And it was massive. Beautiful, isn't it? Ichigo glanced towards Laxus, who was staring at the island in awe. This is the first time I've ever seen this place, but it's just like Gramps said. Laxus held out a hand and pointed at the grand tree. See that? That's known as the Great Tenro Tree. Legends say that it bestows divine protection upon the members of Fairy Tail for as long as they stay on the island. The final retreat and safe haven for Fairy Tail. Possibly. The first master was a genius. She could have easily found a way to protect Fairy Tail, even in death. A flare lit up the sky by the tree. That was it. That was where the master was waiting for them. They didn't have time to waste. The others had similar minds, and there was only one rowing boat available. The main boat itself was moving towards the island, but it was much slower than before. The first task then. They couldn't afford to lose time waiting for the boat to get closer, but the rowing boat wouldn't be necessary. Laxus grabbed hold of Ichigo before muttering a few words. Hold on. Laxus's body enveloped itself in lightning before they were both sent flying towards the island. They reached it a minute later and landed. A quick glance behind them revealed none of the others had made as much progress so far. Are you okay? Ichigo quickly glanced down at himself. Some slight burns from the close contact to lightning, but nothing much, and nothing that hurt. Just light singes, it seemed. I'm okay. Laxus glanced towards the forest they had landed by. We better get going then. There's no knowing how much trouble the creatures in here will be. The two made their way carefully through the forest, watching out for any signs of danger. There was no way of knowing if the noise would give them away, but it was better to be safe than sorry. What kinds of creatures were here? Some of the tracks were large, and he could swear he heard some roars every now and then. A rustling sound filled his ears and he spun round, searching for the source of the noise. Anything? Ichigo looked carefully, but there was nothing. Must have been the wind. Laxus nodded while Ichigo looked back for a moment. For a second there he could have sworn he had seen something blonde. Laxus suddenly stopped and held out his arm. Hold up. You see something? Ichigo glanced forward towards his friend, but he couldn't see anything nearby. Couldn't hear anything nearby either. Laxus ignored his question, instead crouching down by the ground and brushing a few leaves off the ground. What are you looking for? Give me a moment, came the reply. Laxus seemed to be completely engrossed on his task, searching for whatever he was looking for. Found it. Ichigo glanced down at Laxus, who was gesturing for him to come closer. I got the idea from what Levi did. From Levi? Yes, now look. Laxus brushed a few leaves to the side to reveal the start of a line of runes. Are these Jutsushiki, if I'm not mistaken? I see. Ichigo joined Laxus by the ground. Can you read what it says? Not sure, Laxus muttered, focusing closely on the runes. This rune here means transport, and this one is for barrier, so it could be a trap to send us away somewhere. That, or perhaps this is how Gramps brought some extra creatures for the trials. So the barrier could keep them in and send them home afterwards, keeping the ecosystem of the island safe from new predators. Does that mean it's safe to walk in? I doubted there's a way around, or at least not one that won't cost us time. We need to go through, and take down whatever falls into our path. Ichigo's hand moved to the hilt of his sword for a moment before he stood up. Let's risk it. The two took one step forward before a barrier of runes shot up behind them, denying them an exit. Only one way forward. The two took each step carefully, one eye out for any creatures nearby. There was no way of knowing what kind of creature would be in this rune barrier. The sound of snarling filled the air. Ichigo quickly drew his sword from his back while Laxus brought out lightning to surround his body, sparks flicking around his skin. Ready! Ready! The creatures burst out of the bushes, making a beeline for them. They weren't anything he had seen before. They looked like they were crocodiles of some kind, but they had a humanoid figure too. Standing on 2 feet with their hands free and their jaws snapping, they looked a lot like lizardmen. The scales looked weaker than the lizardmen they had fought before though. The color of their scales was a darker green and they weren't as bulky. They were either another species of lizardmen or something else entirely. There was a flash of green light before each of the lizardmen's appearance changed. Half of their numbers gained blonde hair and a small lightning bolt scar in the same place that Laxus had his. Lightning also flickered around their bodies in a way that looked just like what Laxus was doing. The other half gained orange hair like his own and were holding onto a sword. It looked like an ordinary sword, but if the lizardmen had done what he thought they had done, that wouldn't be a normal sword. It would be a Zanpakuto. Copy magic, he heard Laxus call out. So his theory was right. That was good to know. He swiftly jumped and dodged the first swing of one of the lizardmen before blocking a second with his own Zanpakuto. How many were there? It looked like 5 were on Laxus and 3 were on him. 8 copies of them in total. This was going to be a pain. His eyes widened as he saw what the third lizardman was doing. It held out its palm and charged up a sphere of red energy before it was launched straight at him. That was Shakaha. The lizardman could use Kita too. He dodged the attack easily, but it was still frightening to see. There wasn't even an incantation to that spell, yet he had been able to sense the power behind it. It had been strong. Going by their magical power, he doubted they would be able to cast anything higher than the 30 levels. But that kind of surprise attack could be deadly. He had to be careful when engaging them. How was Laxus doing? He seemed to be coping for now, but he seemed to be having some problems. While these lizardmen didn't have as much magic as they did, they were definitely good at copying their magic. Wait a moment. Did that lizardman just eat Laxus's lightning? That was bad. There had managed to copy the Dragon Slayer magic Laxus had, and he seemed to be forced to use it himself to counter it, devouring their lightning attacks as they devoured his own. He was brought back to his own fight as he ducked under one of the lizardman's swings, striking out with his fist and knocking the lizardman back. His hands swiftly drew a triangle in the air as he generated Shitosu Sansen, only to find one of the other lizardmen doing the same. Bakuda number 30, Shitosu Sansen. Like before, the lizardman showed it didn't need to say anything to fire the spell. The two connected in mid-flight and cancelled each other out. A blue blast of lightning suddenly shot through the air, Ichigo reaching at the last moment so that the attack fly past his face instead of hitting it dead on. So they didn't just copy the magic the user knew. They could go further than that. He couldn't use Byakurai at all due to it being a level 4 Hata, but these lizardmen had the capacity to use it from the look of it. He didn't have any extra time to think about their Kidu usage. The other two engaged him again in close quarters, forcing him onto the defensive. They had his sword style, it seemed. Well, it wasn't so much a style, rather an instinctual way he had of fighting. A type to survive and win. How were they learning all of this? Did they perhaps infiltrate their minds and work out all their abilities and how to use them? It would explain how they knew how to use the Kita spells and how Laxus's spells worked. It wasn't something you could learn to such a degree, but just copying. He dodged another set of attacks and a surprise Kita before he launched his own. Ukasen was cancelled out though by a quick use of Shakaha, and he had to dodge the orange rope of energy when it suddenly appeared and tried to grab him. Hurin. That was a level 9 Bakudu, particularly useful to bind the target and capture them so others could attack. They were getting smarter. Something like that would open him up to their attacks. He brought his sword up as energy gathered around it. Fine then. If Kita wouldn't work, he would use something else. Getchuga Tenshou. The energy flew off the blade only to be intercepted mid-flight from a combined set of Sukatsui. So they had enough power together to stop his Getchuga Tenshou. This was going to get troublesome unless he did something soon. He couldn't just wait for them to get a lucky shot in, and he didn't dare release his Zanpakuto. It would be bad if they did the same, especially since he hadn't released it yet since he learned his Zanpakuto's name. An explosion of magical energy could be sensed suddenly from Laxus. As he looked over, he saw Laxus's shirt ripping as his muscles expanded and his canine teeth sharpened. That was Dragon Force. Was he an idiot? If they copied Dragon Force too, then it would be too much for his friend to handle. Ichigo. Ichigo snapped out of his worries as Laxus called out to him. They copy our magic style and learn our abilities. They can't use what they can't access. Laxus proved his point by suddenly slamming into one of the lizardmen, grabbing it and beating it down in one punch. They can't copy my dragon force and they can't copy something of yours. Ichigo wishes his friend would have just said what they couldn't copy instead of giving a hint, but it seemed he wanted him to come to the answer himself. You still haven't called me Ichigo. That wasn't Laxus that time. Time slowed down as he focused on the voice calling out to him. They can imitate your magic but they can't imitate your soul. I won't answer anyone's call but your own. Ichigo slowly brought his arm to his side, his free hand joining his right on his sword's hilt. Look at them. Imposters, all of them. They don't have a scrap of the power you have. Show these fakes your power. Show them your resolve. His power skyrocketed, the winds picking up around him. Now shout out my name. Zanjutsu. The energy he brought out exploded outwards in a pillar of light, reaching high into the sky. When it finally cleared, Ichigo could be seen in the center, his Zanpakuto over his shoulder. The blade had changed dramatically from the long katana it was before. In its place was an oversized trench knife with a small section of chain hanging from the end of the hilt. His appearance had altered slightly too. Around his neck was a pair of black bands of some kind, a white outline around each of them. Some X-style bands were on his arms too, one of each wrist. He could see the top of a similar one, just under his shirt and crossing over the top of his chest. 4 black lines went across each hand as well, each line vertical from his knuckles down to his wrist. There were similar bands to the ones around his wrist and chest on his ankles too from what he could see, and all 3 of them looked more like tattoos than bands, unlike the ones around his neck. He lifted the sword of his shoulder with one hand and held it up, examining the blade. He moved his left hand towards the hilt for a moment before stopping. It didn't seem to feel right. Perhaps that was why the blade was so light for him. So he could still cast Kita without problems. So this was his Shikai. He liked it. This was something he could work with. He gave Zanjutsu a few quick practice swings before he noticed the lizardmen. It looked like they were trying to imitate what he had done and were failing to get a version of Zanjutsu. Zanjutsu and Laxus had been right. They had copied his Shinigami magic but they couldn't get the same result without copying his soul. They weren't able to use Zanjutsu. He didn't know how he knew what to do but he listened to that instinct. He brought the sword back and watched as energy gathered around the blade. Then he swung. It was nothing like even the Getsuga Tenshou he used recently. The attack had been magnified dramatically, smashing through their hurried Kita spells that they fired to intercept the attack. It ripped through all the obstacles in its path and crashed directly into the lizardmen. They didn't even stand a chance. When the energy finally cleared, all 3 lizardmen were lying on the floor, their bodies changed back to their original form. Ichigo looked down at Zanjutsu in shock of how he had known what to do. Why are you surprised, Ichigo? This blade is a part of you. You already had the knowledge of how to use me. You just needed to remember. So that was what Kisuke had meant about Zanpakuto, meaning some of the best teachers. They didn't have to always teach you because all they needed to do was remind you of what you needed to do. The secrets were hidden in his own soul. Looking at the destruction though, he realized one problem. He knew how to use his Zanpakuto. He didn't know how to control the damage it did yet. And he though Getsuga Tenshou alone had been destructive. Using Zanjutsu took it to another level. Good. I was wondering when you would be done. Ichigo looked towards Laxus as the teen spoke, noticing how he had exited Dragon Force already. Behind him were the smoking bodies of the other lizardmen. It looked like they didn't have very good protection against Dragon Force amplified techniques. Laxus eyed his new appearance. Tattoos? Didn't think they were your thing. Ichigo swung his sword to one side, the trench knife shape returning to the previous katana form before he sheathed it away. As the Shikai ended, the bands and tattoos disappear with it. Do you think there are more? Laxus turned to the bodies of the lizardmen. Doubt it. This is the number I would have chosen for a group. Any more and it could cause problems. These lizardmen were vicious with their attacks. What kind of species are they? I haven't seen any like this. Laxus bent down by one of the bodies. They're too thin and the shape is off. They are definitely lizardmen but I don't remember them having this type of magic. Seems too artificial. Laxus sighed. I don't want to know who created these creatures but they are dangerous. I hope we don't encounter too many of these in the future. Let's keep going. Ichigo looked towards the tree. We wasted too much time here. We've still got to get you promoted after all. Yeah. Laxus quieted down suddenly as a massive shadow covered the ground of where they were. Turning around slowly, they saw a massive scaled creature standing on its back legs. It was taller by far than all the trees around them, and the top of its head was rounded smoothly, a few specks of blood just about able to be seen on it. Is that Dash? A Discodon? Yeah. I don't think he brought that one. I'm starting to hate this island at the moment. Me too. Should we be running? The Discodon let out a large roar as its eyes focused on the two of them. I'd say yes. Run. Protector of the Fairies. Makarov found himself waiting by the base of Tenro's massive tree with one thing on his mind. Boredom. Why hadn't he brought something with him? It would have helped pass the time while he waited for the participants to arrive at the island. A thought projection sounded like such a good idea at the time. He could get a good kick out of tricking everyone. Now, he wished he had left it there so he could have talked to someone. When everyone finally did arrive, he thought that he had something interesting to do then. He could watch their progress and determine if they were truly S-class material. They had only been nominated after all to have the potential. It didn't mean they had realized it yet. He sighed. Almost everyone had lost almost by the time they reached the island. Their squabbles had destroyed the only rowing boat, and instead of trying to swim, which would have been quicker, they waited for the boat to dock. Those three groups were no good. They needed to show initiative from the start. They simply went along with the flow and didn't try to look for other methods. He wondered how far they would have gotten through the forests if they had made it though. Laxus. He got it. He took himself and Ichigo straight to the island using his magic instead of trying to wait. He realized it was a faster option and took it. That was good. Understanding your power and using it in the right circumstances. All Laxus would have to do now was reach him in the 1 hour period. Monitoring their progress had been interesting. Of all things they had to run into, they had run into those lizardmen he had captured. He wasn't sure where they came from, but they weren't natural. They would be a tough opponent for his grandson and Ichigo. And they did prove to be. Laxus had to deal with 5 versions of himself while Ichigo had 3 of himself, admittedly with some spells that the boy had looked enviously at. They must have been spells the kid couldn't use. Then Laxus had risen above and beyond. He had known his grandson was practicing more with his Dragon Slayer magic, but to enter Dragon Force was nothing short of incredible. The lizardmen were completely outmatched. And Ichigo too. That kid's strength always scared him. The damage that attack did with his new sword was too much, and judging by the kid's reaction, it hadn't been completely controlled. That kind of attack would be devastating when he mastered it. The two should reach him soon, and as long as they made it in time, Laxus would pass. Laxus. His grandson had grown so much. If Ichigo hadn't been there, Laxus may have hated him for kicking his father out of the guild. After all, Laxus hadn't gone on many missions before Ichigo turned up, mostly lazing around the guild and listening to music. But as much as Ichigo had been a good influence on his grandson, he hoped that was all it was. That boy. He didn't trust him. He and Laxus both always talked about taking Fairy Tail to the top, but they stuck to their belief that power was the way forward. If you had power, you could reach your goals. He would argue differently, but he knew it wouldn't make a difference. Power was good, but it could also corrupt. And Ichigo gave him doubts. Why would that kid continue to take missions from the Magic Council? What would they have to offer him? Maybe it was money? Then again, the kid never seemed to spend much, as he always picked quest requests based on content, not reward. Maybe it was power again. That made more sense. If the council offered him power, there was a good chance the kid might have accepted it. There was that one doubt in his mind about the kid's mental state though. What if he went on them because he enjoyed killing? He hadn't come back covered in blood unlike the first time, yet he could have easily washes before he returned. Getting all that blood on you meant he had experienced something dreadful, and that could easily make him start to disregard the value of human lives. That brought up problems about considering the child for the S-class trials next year and afterwards. Power wasn't enough. He needed to be someone he could trust to a degree and who could represent Fairy Tale. Gildarts had hinted that the boy would be ready quickly, but he was unsure. He didn't want to take that risk. When he did test the child, he would need Gildarts there. He could see if the boy was ready and test him to his heart's content. He knew the man had taken a liking to the young Shinigami. It was different from the relationship he had with Natsu. It was more like a master and an apprentice type thing, Gildarts wanting to make sure he had found himself an eventually successor. He hoped Levy's inclusion to Ichigo's little team would be enough to set him back on the right path. He couldn't give the boy infinite chances, but he could give him some leeway for now. Levy was a smart girl, and sweet as well. She could always let him know if Ichigo started acting odd. A rustling noise distracting him, and he stood up, barely any taller from when he had been sitting down. He glanced down at the watch on his arm before counting down in his head. 5, 4, 3, 2. Here. Laxus made it. The two mages crawled out of the bushes, looking like drowned cats. Did they run through a stream of something? Don't ask, said Laxus, just as he tried to open his mouth to say something. The master chose to smile at his grandson instead. I'll say this instead then. Congratulations, S-Class Mage. Protector of the Fairies. A med scientist crouched over his work, scratching down a few notes onto paper as he observed the tests in front of him. Mayuri, sir. The man in question looked up from his work to see the shaking form of one of his scientists. What, you fool? Can't you see I'm busy? The man bowed quickly. I'm sorry, sir. It's just that, well, man, spit it out. There's someone here to see you. Mayuri looked at the man strangely for a moment before his face tightened with anger. What? Who's there? How did someone find us? That's not a nice thing to say to a guest. Mayuri and the scientist froze at the newcomer's voice. Instead of being annoyed at the interruption though, Mayuri looked intrigued. How did you get past my defenses? This lab is hidden well, and the defenses are on the level any secret lab needs. I aged them. Aged them. The man held out an arm and the desks nearby restored to their original conditions before usage had worn them out. As quickly as that happened, the desks aged till they were covered in rust and collapsed. Arc of time. That's a lost magic. You would think the work you are doing would be the same. Mayuri sniffed the air. You're tainted by something. Death. What did you encounter? Tell me and I'll make your dissection painless. You won't do that. I'm too useful for you. Useful? I don't have a clue who you are. The man reached up to the shirt he was wearing before pulling it open, revealing a guild mark beneath it. The mark of Poison Viper. So you're the guild master? The man tilted his head. What makes you assume something like that? Mayuri snorted. That kind of guild was troublesome but still trash. That ring they got was the only reason they were a threat. Since you are tainted by death, you must have come into contact with the ring. The only other to do so was the supposed leader, but his magic matches the type to steal the ring. You though have a fair amount of power. In dark guilds, the strongest leads them. You don't strike me as the kind of man to be ordered around. Mayuri suddenly gestured towards the man himself. And look at you. You're angry. Angry that I insulted your guild and angry that I insulted your subordinates. You cared for them and now they are all dead. But still. Mayuri raised a hand to his head as he examined the man. Why are you here? The Shinigami isn't anywhere nearby. I may have arrived late, but I saw what that kid did. The man scowled just from the memory. I want to crush him, but I don't have the strength to do so. So I came to you. I got from my sources that you are trying to create something. Something powerful. And you want and do you? Sorry, but I only need Shinigami or those who haven't learned magic yet. You can't become a Shinigami, so you aren't worth my time. You are trying to combine the powers of Shinigami and Hollows. Am I wrong? Mayuri froze for a moment before turning to the scientist. Get out. The scientist didn't need any other incentive to escape. Now then. Where did you learn that? The man let out a booming laugh. When you make a deal with demons, make sure they keep their mouths shut. I see. Mayuri frowned. If that guild had let slip his project to this man, who else could they have told? Well, it doesn't matter. I don't need you here and you aren't useful for my experiments on holification, so get lost. Your experiments aren't working, are they? You aren't an expert at this, unlike Kisokura Hara. How did you hear that name? No, rather how do you know about his knowledge? The man didn't do anything to start with. Then he reached into his pocket and brought something out and placed it on the table. Mayuri stared at it in awe before snapping out of his trance. How? How did you find this? The same place where I got your location. Everything can be found in hell eventually. Name your terms. So quick to change your mind. I can't make you a hybrid, snapped Mayuri. It's impossible. The man laughed again. Who said you have to do it one way? Mayuri's annoyance slowly disappeared as he took in the man's words. You would let me run tests, of course. Of course. And you understand what you are asking me to do here? Yes. Good. A large creepy smile appeared on the med scientist's face. I always wanted to experiment with a hollow. I wonder how it will work by using the hollow power first compared to the Shinigami power. Mayuri strode up to the man before examining every inch of the man. The man did look old with his white hair and mustache, and that scar down his right eye looked like it had taken away the man's sight in that eye, but that wouldn't matter once he became a hollow. All impurities would be removed and then he would have the perfect lab rat. This man wouldn't become a wizard though. This was a difference procedure. Aaron Carr. That sounded better for this pet project. Maybe this method would be more successful than the wizard one. Who knew? The joy of being a scientist. There were always tests to run. He left the object the man had given him on the desk for now. He would run some tests on it later, but he doubted it would need any adjustments. It was a godsend for his research. For now, he ignored the small orb, energy flowing inside the sphere. It had been Kisuk's masterpiece all those years ago. And now it was his. Protector of the Fairies. First quest of the S-class mage. Ichigo peered over the edge of the rocks down at the valley below. Quiet. That was the only way to describe it. Too quiet though. Team Fairy had been on this quest for almost 2 weeks now. For what they were hunting, it was far longer than they had expected. Ichigo sighed as he pulled back from the cliff edge and headed back down the slope. The others would be waiting back at the camp, hoping for some good news. Their first S-class mission was far different than they had expected. So far, it had been nothing more than a glorified tracking mission. Looking for magic residue from their target, asking around towns for rumors of sightings, and basically hoping one of the leads would work. Really, they should have seen it by now. A massive demon wasn't hard to miss. All they had to go on was that the demon was meant to be powerful and hard to find. Not on the level of one of Zeref's, but still dangerous. They had seen its work a few towns back and it looked recent. They couldn't be too far behind. Ichigo weaved around the trees before arriving at the camp. Laxus looked up at him and looked down again in annoyance, probably noticing his mood. Levi didn't notice straight away, fiddling with her new clothes. They had insisted she get some new stuff after a few of their experiments with her magic. While it seemed she could enhance her clothes and herself normally with her magic, the material wasn't a good conductor for it and it soon fizzled out far too quickly. It was okay for emergencies, but in a real fight, you didn't want your magic to fail you at the last moment. That would be suicide. Of course, while Levi wanted stylish stuff, they wanted her to have practical stuff. Laxus had been all for a suit of metal armor like Urza, something Levi had protested heavily at. Too little protection though, and even the enhancements wouldn't be enough. In the end, they had managed to get her a few pieces of leather-like armor, mostly consisting of arm guards, new boots, and a short-sleeved jacket. It hadn't been cheap for what they were made of, but they would be much more effective than her normal clothes, and she could still wear that stuff as long as she wore the armor over it on their missions. They had also insisted she had something to defend herself at close range. She wasn't the close combat type of mage, as her magic was more suited to range currently. To overcome that, they had forced her to choose some kind of weapon that could at least give her a helping hand. It was attached horizontally behind her back on her waist now. A small cylinder that seemed like nothing of significance. It was much more than it seemed though, and was good at conducting magic like her new clothes. At least now, they could let her fight more easily on a mission like this. There was no way they would leave her alone right now though, despite her quick improvements. She was here to learn firsthand about strength and power in battle, and the best way to become stronger was through experience. Alone, she would never beat the demon. That was what they would be there for. She finally noticed him, raising a hand in greeting. Anything? Ichigo shook his head. Nothing. This demon's good at hiding. I can't see anything. Laxus sighed. I thought I couldn't sense anything nearby. A demon of this size should be like you. A beacon to everyone everywhere. Should I hang back for a while? Laxus shook his head. No. I'm not fighting this demon alone with Levi. He turned towards the girl. Sorry Squirt, but I'd rather have Ichigo by my side. No offense, said Levi, not letting it get to her. Laxus didn't mean anything mean by it. It was just his way of talking. He sounded insulting, but he was simply being honest. She had no doubts that she wouldn't be a match for the demon, and that their best chance was with Ichigo and Laxus's teamwork. Ichigo pulled a map out and crossed off another location. So what is this? Site 12. 13. I think we hit 15 3 days ago, muttered Laxus. We can't have many leads left, do we? Ichigo checked the map, counting off the remaining circles on it. From the look of it, there must be 20 left. Too many leads, not enough time. Levi joined them in their size. Should we ignore the earliest ones? Laxus nodded. She has a point. By now the demon would have moved on from them. Unless you think it continued on in that path and the latest rumors were wrong, that is. We saw the damage. Ichigo gestured down at the towns on the map. Each one was taken down one by one, and the destruction pattern keeps fitting the original description. A rain of fire called down from the sky and winds strong enough to topple the walls. It has to be nearby. Laxus looked down at the map before something seemed to click. Pass me the pen. Ichigo frowned but did as he was asked. Laxus slowly leaned down and crossed locations off, one by one. Each movement was slow but done as if he was confirmed details first off to be sure of what he was doing. After a few minutes of silence, the only noise coming from the occasional scratch of paper and pen, Laxus finally finished, leaving 3 points left on the map. Are you sure about these ones? Laxus looked at him with confidence. Of course. He gestured at the earliest locations. As Levi suggested, the earliest ones are no good. We should have heard about more destruction from that direction otherwise. People say it went that way, perhaps it did and they doubled back. Demons can be quite tricky after all. Laxus now showed them the points nearest the middle of the map. Now look at these ones. Too close to each other yet nothing. We should have seen something in the distance, or at the very least, we should have sensed something. Demon magic has a certain trait to it, making it easily recognizable. Laxus finally gestured to the 3 points left. Now we have 3 left. The closest one is because this path could still be correct to an extent and we just aren't far enough yet. The other 2 are similar situations. 3 choices yet only one direction. Laxus had thought it all through well. He doubted he would have managed to do it so well. It's this one. The 2 boys turned to Levi in shock, the girl looking extremely nervous at all the sudden attention. I mean. She waved her hands in embarrassment, aiming them at Ichigo. Laxus got the message. So this one. Levi nodded at the location on the map. It was the furthest from them. By how were the 2 sure? Go on, Levi. Levi looked up at Laxus in surprise. The lightning mage had an impressed look on his face. You figured it out first. Levi looked up at Ichigo. Your magic. It's massive. Yeah. So. Couldn't the demon be afraid? Afraid. The word sounded foreign with demons. Why would they be afraid of him? Not you personally, said Laxus when he voiced those words out loud. Right now, the demon would be able to sense you like a beacon, just like its magic would be for us if we got close. Demons both respect and fear those stronger than them, and even if it is tougher, your magical power is enough to ward it off. So it's what? Running scared. Yes. Laxus pointed again at the location on the map. If you sensed a massive source of magical energy, one possibly greater than your own, would you stay and risk fighting it? Probably. If you weren't you. Ichigo tilted his head to the side. The idea of running away always sounded strange to him. If he hadn't been taught as he had been though, he may have considered it as a possibility. Think about it this way. Right now, it doesn't know what you are capable of. Magical power doesn't mean squat if you can't control it, but at a distance, you can't know what level of control someone has. The demon is powerful, but no demon wants to face a fight they could lose. They enjoy being top dogs. Ichigo looked at the map carefully. So let's assume he is here. If he continues in that direction from the city, he will end up here. Laxus examined the map. Hopefully. Looks like a city is right in its path and we've seen it can't resist attacking them. It's the best time to attack. While the demon is distracted, we can buy time for evacuations, and then once everyone is clear, we can fight seriously without risk of injury from collateral damage. Levi raised a hand. Aren't you two always going on about avoiding damages? The cost of them, muttered Ichigo. They can't sue you for damaging the ground, and in this case, they won't care if we level the town or not. It's going to be destroyed either way by the demon and many lives would be lost, so the best we can do is try and kill it before too many die. Laxus nodded at his words. If we are lucky, we may even get there before the attack and can lure the demon further away, but I doubt we will make it in time. This demon is fast for its supposed size. Laxus stood up and grabbed his pack. Let's head out now. Better to get as much ground covered as we can beforehand. This demon will need to rest as well, and we can hopefully use this chance to catch up a bit. You can't sense magical power while you're asleep after all. The three headed out, the eyes glued to the path. They had to move fast. Lives were in the balance here, and seconds could make all the difference. Protector of the Fairies. A bald man stood at the outskirts of the town he had recently arrived at. He stood there silently and without moving, as steady as a rock. A strange staff with a crystal globe resting on the top was held strongly in his left hand. He was waiting. He could sense it getting closer. A demon. When he saw the request about the demon, he had originally planned to take it. Unfortunately though, the mission had already been accepted by another guild. Fairy Tail, if he had heard correctly. He was familiar with the name, but he hadn't had the luxury to meet many Fairy Tail mages before, especially S-class ones. He was one of Lamia Scale's few S-class mages, and like Fairy Tail, the guild had few to start with. He kind of wished to see what kind of people these Fairy Tail mages were like. He had no right to interfere with their mission though, so he had decided he could easily visit the guild later on. He was sure his guild master could get permission from Master Makarov to allow him to visit. The man was known to be a kind and fair person from what he had heard. As luck would have it though, he got his wish to meet the mages sooner rather than later. A new S-class request appeared only a few days back that requested protection from a demon. His mind immediately connected the dots and had accepted the mission before he could think. It was rare that he gave in to impulse, and he hoped he wouldn't regret not thinking it through first. It would be worth it. From what he had predicted, the demon would likely pass by this town. The city had already been evacuated to an underground bunker in the center, left over from the days of Zeref's terror. While he would try and fight the demon away from the town, he couldn't guarantee the town would be left unharmed. It seemed too quiet. He looked and looked, but nothing. From the reports of demon sightings, he had expected a massive beast. So where was it? He could sense a massive source of magical power approaching, but something unnerved him. If it belonged to the demon, why couldn't he see it yet? It didn't make sense. The sound of crashing filling his ears, and he turned, fear on his face. The walls surrounding the city had collapsed, even when supported by his earth magic. But where was the attack coming from? Was the demon invisible? Fire rained from the sky, and it was only then that he realized the demon's trickery. That magical power approaching wasn't the demon's, because the demon was already here, miles above the city itself. It could fly. The magical power had to belong to whoever was tracking this demon. Hopefully it would be the fairy tale mages. He had doubts that he could pull a battle like this off alone now. Still, the intelligence of this demon was surprising. It used its pursuers to trick the defenders so it could launch a surprise attack on the city. It had to want to take down the city as fast as possible to keep ahead of those chasing it. This demon wasn't a dumb brute. Fire seemed to be its main power. The winds could have been generated from the wings. Enhanced beats of them could do such a thing in theory. At least the warnings of fire being rained down from the sky had a basis now. He could wait for the other mages, but he couldn't risk it. He would just have to hope they would make it in time. Until then, he would hold out. He wasn't called Iron Rock Jura for nothing. He raised his right hand and extended his middle and index fingers towards the demon. From around him, pillars of earth rose from the ground and extended high up to the sky. The demon wasn't harmed. It seemed it was too high up. The pillars of earth would only go so far. The further he sent them, the weaker they would become. No matter. He would use this to his advantage. The demon raised one of its clawed hands and fire appeared. It brought its arm back and threw the flame, the fire multiplying as it split into smaller blasts. Jura swiped his hand to the side and the tops of the pillars extended to the sides, joining together and forming a small barrier over the town. The fire connected and destroyed the quickly constructed barrier, but it was enough. He only needed to block the attack. Still, he couldn't afford to waste magic like this. He would have to maximize what he had and hold out. He slammed the staff into the ground and brought his hands together in prayer. Earth rose all around the town, climbing higher and higher as it sloped towards the center. The walls of earth reinforced themselves as layer after layer appeared until the rock eventually met at the top of the town. Jura didn't once release his hands from their prayer position. This defense would last as long as he kept supplying magic. Now the question was whose time would run out first. His or the demon's. Protector of the fairies. Ichigo and the others sped through the trees, getting closer and closer. "You're sure you sensed something?" asked Ichigo. "Yeah." Laxus pointed up ahead of the group. "We're close now and I definitely sensed a large release of magical power up ahead. 2 of them in fact, and 1 wasn't demonic. Someone else is fighting." Ichigo frowned. "Did someone else take our job?" "Doubt it. For one, few people can take S-class missions. For another, no one else can legally take this mission unless we give up or can't complete the mission within a suitable time frame. For something like this, it could range from a few weeks to 2 months. Demons are tricky." "I see something," shouted Levi. The 2 boys joined her in glaring forward, seeing the edge of the forest in view. Beyond it was something odd, which must mean they were getting close. One final push and they were through the forest. Dead ahead was a large dome made completely of earth and rock, holding back the wrath of the demon above it. "So that's why it was hard to track," muttered Ichigo. "It could fly. We need to get it out of the sky." Laxus looked towards Ichigo. "You said that a Shinigami gains access to a whole range of abilities once they unlock Shikai. Something that would allow you to reach targets up high. Do you think you can use it yet?" Ichigo frowned. "I haven't tried much. I've been getting used to Zanjutsu's released form and how Getsuga Tenshou works with him. Give it a try anyway. My lightning form could reach him, but I don't have the raw power to knock him down." "You should. Let's hope Kisuke's lessons about this worked then." Ichigo kicked off the ground. Instead of coming back down, he stayed in the air, rising higher and higher each time his feet kicked off something. Levi looked up at him, shock on her face. "How? He's not flying. I don't even completely understand how it works. What I do know is that because he used pure magic, it has different properties to our own." "You mean like how your magic has traces of lightning in it?" Laxus nodded. "Indeed. But he doesn't have that filtered magic. It's just raw power. From what he told me, this technique he's trying is a form of manipulation of pure magic. He forces his magic under his feet and uses it to create a platform to stand on. Then he uses that platform to jump from. So it's like he's climbing." "Yeah, something like that. Now we should focus on getting to the dome. Have you been practicing that suggestion we gave you before we went to the S-class trials?" Levi nodded. I think I can do it. Then let's go squirt. Laxus's body shifted before he was covered in lightning and flying forward at speeds far greater than before. Levi watched him go before she swiped her hands to the side. Solid script, jump, speed, wait. The words flew towards her clothes, jump attaching to her shoes while speed and weight attached to her jacket. Immediately, she found herself weighing a lot less than before as weight began to make her lighter. It wouldn't last long, but it would allow her to move more easily and survive falls that would otherwise hurt. That was where jump came in handy. A lighter weight and greater jumping power would allow her to maneuver over obstacles with ease by just jumping, and she wouldn't have to worry about hurting herself when she hit the ground with weight active. Finally, speed would allow her to move much faster, especially when combined with the other two. It would only get more effective over time as she gained more magical power and a greater control over her magic, but for now it would suffice. Kicking off the ground, she felt herself flying through the air. She wasn't as fast as the others by a long shot, but she wouldn't be far behind. She felt herself falling, and the moment she hit the ground, she kicked off again, continuing her pace. Ichigo watched from above at the two, a smile appearing on his face at Levi's progress. Now that was how to use solid script creatively. Turning back to the demon in the sky, he needed to work out how to get it down. A normal Getchuga Tenshou wasn't going to be enough. This demon was massive, which meant it would have some extremely high resistances to magical attacks. If he was lucky, it would be a lesser demon. If it wasn't, then they would need a Devil Slayer here to help. This was only an S-class quest though, not one that was higher than that. A high-ranking demon was normally only found on those missions, so they should be okay here. Still, he needed to knock this demon down far. Not only did he have to overcome that resistance, but he would also need to knock it far enough down before it could recover with its wings. He would have to release his Shikai then. Getchuga Tenshou was strongest there. Something about Zanjutsu's blade being able to magnify the destructive power of the attack and release it in one swing. But first, he needed to get closer. He needed to get above the demon, and it didn't look like it was going to let him past easily. The demon slowly turned to him, its eyes widening as it saw the sword in his hand. So even demons feared Zanpakuto. The demon bowed its head slightly before it created large spheres of fire in its hands. So the demon respected his power, it seemed. They were known for respecting power above all else. The demon threw the fireballs, each of the two spheres splitting again and again and again till it was nothing more than a rain of fire falling down at him. This wouldn't be enough to stop him. This looked like an attack designed to bombard a group of enemies or a town. He would slip right past it. There were a lot of fireballs to dodge, but he managed it, weaving his way around the ones that got too close as he kept up his approach. The demon threw down more fire only to get the same result. They both came to the same conclusion. The fireballs weren't going to be enough to stop him. So the demon changed tactics. It brought back its hands as fire surrounded each of the claws. Then it flew at him. So that was its new plan. It was moving much faster than he was now, with gravity on its side, and those claws looked deadly sharp. The fire would increase the range of its swipes dramatically from the looks of it, and he didn't want to know what would happen if he was hit by them. This could work in his advantage though. He needed the demon on the ground, and he needed to get past the demon first. All he had to do was dodge somehow. But the demon was getting closer, and there was no way to avoid it without it adjusting itself to catch him. He needed to be faster and slip through its guard. What was that technique Kisuke talked about? Shunpo. That was it. He hadn't used it before, but he didn't have time to worry about that. He would just have to make do. He only had to travel a short distance, so it didn't matter how many steps it took, just as long as he got past and could attack. He waited till the last moment. The demon got closer and closer till it was almost on top of him. Then he moved. It was far easier than he thought. One moment he was right in front of the demon, and the next he had slipped right past its guard. It hadn't been hard to see a momentary hole in its guard and slip through it. The demon strained its head round as it looked up at him in fear. Why was it so afraid of what he had done? He had only used Shunpo. It should be afraid of what was coming. At his command, his Zanpakuto changed, his familiar oversized trench knife appearing in his hands in place of the sealed form of Zanjutsu. He brought the blade up and gathered energy around the blade, preparing for one massive strike. The demon swallowed whatever fear it had shown and attempted to stop him. He was forced to bring his Zanpakuta down quickly to block the strike of the claws. The energy was still wrapped around the blade. Slowly, he increased the energy he was storing in the blade till it even swallowed him up in the aura. He hadn't tried this before either, but it felt right. No one ever said to him that Getchuga Tenshou had to be fired as a long-range attack. Getchuga Tenshou. The energy exploded down in a massive blast. It seemed that since it didn't need to form the crescent shape to maintain the energy in, it could just release it all at once from the blade's edge. From the ground, Laxus and Levi looked up. They had gotten to the dome and were now looking up at the cloud of smoke from the attack. The demon fell straight through it, heading down to the ground with no attempts being made to stop its fall. It looked like it was recovering, but it wouldn't make it in time. Their prediction was wrong. The demon fell far, but, before it reached the ground, its wings shot out and caught itself just in time. It was far lower, but they would find it hard to battle it in the air, especially Levi. "Damn," Laxus said quietly. It wasn't enough. Levi made to say something when a large rumbling sound filled the air. Before either of them could ask each other what was happening, the dome changed, large spikes firing off it at the demon. After falling so far and barely stopping itself from hitting the ground, the demon didn't have the time to dodge. The spikes of earth smashed into the demon one by one. Most crumbled on impact, not leaving much damage behind. One though got lucky and smashed into the weaker wings of the demon, piercing it. The demon roared in pain as it fell from the sky, one wing not enough to support its massive body. It crashed into the ground and the two mages could feel the shockwave from the crash from where they were standing. Slowly, the dome of earth crumbled into dust and they saw a bald man leaving the town in the direction of the demon, a staff in one hand. They met him halfway as they approached the demon's crash site themselves. Laxus gave him a nod, instantly recognizing who he was. Laxus Driar. S-class mage of Fairy Tail. The man nodded in kind. Juranikis. S-class mage of Lamia Scale. Jura looked down at Levi. And you are? Levi McGarden. Fairy Tail mage. Pleasure to meet you. Levi looked at the body of the demon in the distance. How did you do that? Jura looked at his handiwork. You mean piercing the demon's wing? I couldn't do anything before as it was far too high. Once your friend knocked it down far enough, I could reach it. I meant getting past its magical defenses. Jura smiled. It isn't anything much to brag about. My earth magic is very dense and this demon doesn't have the strongest defenses, especially on its wings. I would make a guess that it never needed them, so it focused on other strengths. Laxus looked at the man with respect. Just what I would expect of Iron Rock Jura. Your magic hardens the earth if what I read was correct. Jura nodded. Indeed. He leaned back slightly and spotted Ichigo in the sky. Your orange-haired friend. Who is he? That guy up there? That's Ichigo. Fairy Tail M-. Shinigami. Laxus scowled at the interruption. Yeah. Jura released another smile. Incredible. I never thought I would meet one, especially not one so young. Ichigo appeared in front of them suddenly, out of breath. You okay? Asked Laxus. That was a big attack there. I'm fine. Ichigo took a few deep breaths. Haven't used Shunpo before, so I'm not used to using it for large distances. Ichigo looked at Jura. Who's the bald guy? That seemed a bad thing to say as Jura almost immediately went into a depression. What did I say? Ignore him. Laxus looked towards the demon. He's our ally at least. Indeed. Jura snapped out of his depression as the demon slowly started to rise. You may call me Jura. For now, we have an enemy to face. Ichigo looked at the demon and brought up Zanjutsu ready. He's a tough one. Took the full blunt of one of my strongest Getchuga Tenshou attacks and still caught itself before it fell too far. Levi reached behind her back and pulled out the cylinder. As she brought it out, it extended till a large pole-like staff was in her hands. Solid script, steel. The word attached itself to the staff and the staff glowed for a moment till it disappeared. The staff would hurt a lot more now than before. Laxus slammed his fists together as he activated Dragon Force, his body expanding as his muscle mass increased. His canine teeth sharpened and the scales appeared on his arms. The lightning flickering around his body intensified with the increase in power and a growl escaped from his throat. Jura stabbed the staff into the ground behind him as the orb on top glowed. He shifted himself into a combat stance and focused his eyes on the target. He was ready to launch an attack the moment the demon moved. And move it did. The demon rose off the ground and stood up, towering over them. It looked down at them in anger and fire covered its hands completely. Reminds me a lot of Natsu, Laxus muttered to the others. He clapped his hands together and lightning sparked between them before it increased in intensity to form a large spear of lightning. Lightning Dragon's heavenward halberd. Gripping the spear carefully, Laxus threw it at the demon. The attack flew at great speeds towards the demon who simply crushed it with one swipe of its fire claws. It had moved though. As one claw came down to destroy the attack, Ichigo appeared behind the arm with his sword raised high. Getsuga Tenshou. The attack flew down at the demon and impacted on the same arm the demon had just attacked with, forcing it to stumble. Jura was already next. He pointed his index and middle fingers at the demon and swiped upwards, spears of earth flying up from the earth and impacted on the demon's chest. Before it could try and get up, Levi brought back her staff. Solid script, wait. The word appeared at the edge of the pole before she swung, sending the word flying above the demon. It fell and crashed on the demon's back, pinning it to the ground. Levi inwardly smiled proudly. She wasn't sure if she would have been able to get the right meaning for weight in her magic after using it to lighten herself, so she was glad it had been successful with the opposite meaning. Ichigo dropped down to one of its arms before holding out his left palm and drawing a triangle in the air. Bakuda number 30, Shitosu Sansen. The three beaks appeared at each corner and flew into the arm of the demon, piercing it and holding the arm tightly to the ground. You think that will hold it? Shouted Laxus. He got his answer when the demon started to move. It brought up its free arm and the claws sharpened beyond what they had before. With one swipe, the demon plunged the claws into its trapped arm, the flames cutting through the skin and burning the wound shut with the flames. Ichigo looked at the demon in shock before disappearing in a burst of shunpo, barely dodging the strike of the demon. It may have lost its arm, but it didn't make it any less dangerous. The demon forced itself up to its feet, Levi's solid script, wait, doing nothing to stop it. We can't let this demon get the upper hand, said Jura as he extended the rest of his fingers on his hands. Use everything you have. We need to finish this in one shot. Levi turned towards Laxus. Have this to help. Solid script, lightning. Laxus nodded at her in gratitude before hungrily devouring the lightning word. He smiled in satisfaction. That hit the spot. Laxus leaned back and took a deep breath, small sparks flickering around his mouth. Lightning Dragon's roar. It was exactly as Laxus said. He fired a large blast of lightning as a massive beam from his mouth, just like the roar of a dragon. The demon wasn't willing to give up yet. Fire shot out of its mouth and collided with the attack. The fire split into pieces as the lightning shot straight past it, however, the hurried defense not able to stop the lightning dragon's roar. It struck the demon dead on in the chest and left it paralyzed along with the damage it inflicted. The demon looked at him in rage as it tried to move. Getsuga Tenshou. The demon could just about look up to see the large arc of energy flying down at it and impacting, forcing it back down. Jura swiped with his hands as large boulders of earth sprung out of the ground and collided with the demon, swallowing it below the rocks. The moment the demon was sufficiently trapped, Jura brought up his hands. Supreme King Rock Crush. Two large hands of earth sprung out of the ground and smashed the pile of boulders together, attempting to crush the demon. The demon survived, but it looked extremely battered. It could barely move after the force of all three attacks and looked to be trying to crawl away. How pitiful. Jura shook his head at the demon. Even when facing death, I had hoped this demon would show resolve. At least then, it could say that it went out staying true to what it believed in, despite that being human annihilation. It was weak in the end, said Ichigo as he appeared next to the man. Its flight was its greatest strength because it isn't physically as strong as most demons. If it was, it would have put up a stronger fight. Laxus started walking over to the demon. We can't let this demon go. It would just go on to kill more. Jura joined him. I agree. Let us finish this. Ichigo stayed back with Levi and watched as the two older mages went to finish off the demon. He needed some rest anyway. Using Shunpo took a lot when you were new to it and he was finding it exhausting. That last attack had taken a lot of energy as well. Are you okay? Ichigo looked at the concerned girl. I'm fine. Just need some more time to rest. The girl nodded before they both turned their attention back to Laxus and Jura. Each mage had reached the demon's chest before Jura pinned the demon down with pillars of earth. Laxus jumped up onto the upper body of the demon and created another lightning spear. He carefully aimed and stabbed down, directly to where the demon's heart would be found. The demon let out a large roar of pain before it stopped struggling, falling down to the ground. With its heart destroyed, it was gone. It was dead. The town was saved. Protector of the Fairies. So you became an S-class mage only a few weeks back. Laxus nodded. The tasks were tricky but nothing too hard that Ichigo and I couldn't handle. This S-class quest was more challenging. Jura seemed interested in this. You are Master Makarov's grandson, are you not? Hey. Laxus grabbed part of the man's robe and forced him to his feet. What are you implying? Nothing like that. Jura quickly realized his mistake with his question. I meant that perhaps because you are close to your grandfather, he already knew you had the skills needed. The trial may have just been a formality to pass you if no other candidates were at par with his standards. Laxus released his grip. I see. Sorry about that. There is no harm done. It was my fault for my poor wording. So what's Lamia scale like? Jura raised an eyebrow at Ichigo's question. It is a good guild, though not as crazy as Fairy Tail is. Why? Just curious on what other guilds are like and how they operate. Laxus decided to join in with this conversation too. How much damage does your guild cause weekly? Jura looked at the two in confusion. Not much. Just the bits you would expect on high-level jobs. WH-. The two Fairy Tail mages in front of him weren't listening to him anymore. They had suddenly switched to whispers, occasionally eyeing him as if they were working out how he worked. Ignore them. Jura looked towards the blue-haired girl. But they won't snap out of that for a while. Levi let out a yawn but resisted the urge to sleep yet. Those two really want to change Fairy Tail. I'm with them but I don't understand everything yet. I'm still new to their group. They want to change Fairy Tail. A switch flicked in Jura's head. You mean they want to change how it works? Try and avoid causing mass damage to the surrounding. Levi nodded. They're always careful on missions but I don't think the others always are, or at least not the kids my age. They like causing destruction and don't realize the impact it's giving us. Laxus said that something needs to be done. Jura frowned. It is curious why the guild is still open if the rumors are to be believed. Fairy Tail must have a great ally in the council to have lasted so long. He isn't much help, muttered Levi. Ichigo does all the work. Even the supposed ally we have on the council doesn't help as much as Ichigo. Jura looked at the orange-haired Shinigami. I see. I wondered what I was feeling from being around you three. It's him. Levi looked lost. Huh. Can't you feel it? That boy collects people around him and makes them his allies. It doesn't have to be many but the ones who join him acknowledge him like no others. The way I see it, he could ask you two to follow him straight to hell and you would do so. Levi still looked lost. You haven't noticed it yet? You will in time. Even now, I already feel his pull. Give him a little longer and I would most likely follow him one day if he asked me to. He is strong, both mentally and physically. Jura smiled. I want to fight him myself one day. A matchup of two warriors, just fighting for fun. Tell him I look forward to it one day. Jura stood to his feet, the two older Fairy Tail mages snapping out of their arguments to focus on him. I bid you all farewell. Ichigo raised a hand in farewell while Laxus got to his feet and shook the man's hand. Until next time, Iron Rock Jura. And until next time, Dragon Slayer, Shinigami, and Word Priestess. Levi smiled at her new nickname before the S-class mage vanished into the distance. Laxus eventually broke the silence that fell. So that's the end of the quest. Much better than those lower-ranked quests. I liked it too, said Levi quietly. Though I wonder how I will find missions with Jet and Droy. Ichigo answered for her. Boring. She couldn't help but nod. After chasing down a demon, helping clear up a park or deliver a parcel would be so boring after that. Maybe she should take some more quests as a member of Team Fairy then. It had been fun this mission and the one before. And she couldn't imagine fighting in another team. The three smiled at each other, letting all their worries vanish to the winds. What did it matter about the future at the moment? At least for now, they were nothing more than a team, having the time of their lives. And they weren't going to miss a second of it. Protector of the Fairies. Check the description for the links to the author.